The Hagmann and Hagmann Report for today. It is Monday, April 6, 2015. I'm Doug Hagmann in studio with my son, fellow investigator, fellow researcher Joe Hagmann. Together we are the Hagmann and Hagmann Report. Folks, you're about to hear just an incredible 3-hour program. We cut through the lies, the misinformation, the misdirection to bring you the truth behind. Well, what's the information, the stuff that's propelling the headlines of today. That's what we bring to you. We look at the news in 3D. For new listeners, we broadcast live each and every weeknight from 8 to 11 p.m. Eastern. Our home base on the internet is hagmannandhagmann.com. That's hagmannandhagmann.com. And we are simulcast through the Christians United Broadcasting Network. There you can tune us in at the hagmannandhagmannreport.com. I want to thank everyone for deliberately tuning into us tonight. Sometimes you have to make an effort to tune into us, and we appreciate that. I want to remind everyone that portions of this show tonight, the show is sponsored by NatureBox. NatureBox, well, they ship tasty and guilt-free snacks right to your door. They've got over 100 flavors to choose from, like Asiago and cheddar cheese crisps, pistachio, power clusters. Oh, how good they are. As well as Big Island pineapple, cranberry medley. You know what? You'll never get bored of snacking again. Definitely try NatureBox for free. That's right, for free. By going to naturebox.com/CFP-radio. That's naturebox.com/CFP-radio. Or, better yet, go to hagmannandhagmann.com, scroll all the way down, and click on the box where it says NatureBox there, and it'll take you right to our little world on NatureBox. All right. We've got so much to talk about tonight, and our guest tonight joining us is Mr. Dave Hodges from the Common Sense Show. You know, this guy's out in front, taking all the flack, either ducking or bleeding, you know, one of the two, sometimes both, but nonetheless, he's out there doing the research, incredible amount of research. He just came out with an article. That's, well, I'll tell you what, an article here within the last 24 hours. Joe read it, I read it, we both read it, we talked about it. It's about Jade Helm. It's about the Jade Helm exercises coming up here. Exercises? ? Coming up July 15th through September 15th. So we're going to be talking about that. I want to mention, too, very quickly, that the book Mass Awakening by Paul McGuire just got ours delivered here. I think it was on Saturday. It's down this weekend. Pretty nasty, sick down this weekend. So I was able to read just almost the entire book. I had the pleasure of doing the honor of writing the foreword to this book. But it's one of the most important books you'll ever grab, you'll ever read, I believe. Mass Awakening, it's called. Paul McGuire is the author. What a tremendous book. And you know, when I saw, folks, on Easter Day, when I saw the, oh my goodness, the Drudge headline, I don't know how many people saw that about the techs attempting to, well, the people defy death. That's right. Tech Titans plan to defy death. I took a screen capture of that headline, as well as the article from the Washington Post. And this is what we've been talking about. And people have called us conspiracy kooks and nuts and fruitcakes and all that. But there it is, in living
right on the
black and
Washington
white.
Post. Yeah. Tech Titans' latest project, Defy Death. But Dave's latest article, which you can find on the Common Sense Show, is 17 things you can count on when Jade Helm 15 goes live. And we had Nathan Leal on Friday who talked about and broke down a lot of Jade Helm 15 and what it means. And Dave, welcome back to the Hagmann and Hagmann Report. It's always a great time when you come on, and it's an excellent article you wrote, and we're going to get into this tonight. 17 things you can count on when Jade Helm 15 goes live. His website is thecommonsenseshow.com. Welcome, Mr. Hodges.
Well, it's great to be with you guys. It's been far too long, but it's not like we haven't talked. I think people in the listening audience may be surprised at how much so many of the different talk show hosts and website directors actually communicate with each other, and how often we do.
You raise a very good point, Dave. And folks, Dave Hodges is a guy that I'm in regular contact with, and Joe is as well. And we talk talk about different things. And I got to tell you, Dave, it seems like, boy, are we under attack? And I'm not going to get into it, but talk show hosts today in the alternative media are under so much attack, and so many by so many entities and people and by so many directions. I'm not, I won't get into the nuances of this, but
it's become like a normal.
You wake up.
It's a regular thing.
Yeah, you wake up in the morning and you just wonder what's going to happen today. It's incredible.
You have to learn to let this stuff roll off of you, or it'll make you insane.
Oh, absolutely.
In fact, let me just listening audience an example of what I'm talking about. I got the big thing coming up that I can't talk about, but on March 8th, my website was hacked between March 8th and March 10th 31 times. And I had experts going in. I mean experts, people who make a living at this, and they had trouble closing the doors, and we kept finding problems. And then my Facebook page was taken down. People couldn't read my posts. And then my email was wiped out. And then my calendar was wiped out. And then subsequently they came in and got my contacts, all in different files. I could go on, but the attacks are endless. And you just have to say, my wife even said, she goes, "You're not really that upset?" And I said, "I can't afford to be."
That's right.
I said, "I'm going to press on with a mission, and you just have to let this stuff roll off of you." And it's kind of like playing in a basketball game and you're down by 20 in the first half. You still got a chance to come back. You just got to keep your eye on the prize and keep on going, and that's what I do. Fortunately, we were able to get some real experts to help us, and I was able to recover almost all my data. But this is just the cost of doing business. People are gunning for you. There are trolls out there that regularly patrol the websites and the radio shows, and they call in and try to make trouble, or they write in on the message board and accuse you of horrible things, and they try to pit one group against another. And we just, we're pretty united. There's not a lot that knocks us off our center of balance occasionally, but not very often. But I don't think the listening audience really, until you live it, you don't know how you're under attack almost every single day, either from the government or competing mainstream media interests. I mean, guys, you know who I suspect of attacking my website, Facebook, and contacts, calendar, and emails? It's the Russians.
Yeah.
I was writing this stuff. I've had trouble with the Russian media before. I had Voice of Russia commit fraud against me by misrepresenting my credentials before I came on. And then when I came on and corrected them and proceeded to kick their butt with documentation that there are Russian soldiers in this country preparing for martial law, preparing to arrest and possibly execute American citizens, they call me an extremist. Yet I documented everything. So I got into a war of words with them a year and a half ago, and then I've had people writing to me in Russian, and I got it translated. And, oh, my gosh, the stuff they're saying, I haven't heard that kind of talk since I played college basketball and I was in the locker room. The stuff, I mean, these Russians have been relentless. Now, they've let up a little bit because I've turned my attention to Jade Helm and less attention on Putin and the coup that I think he went through over there and how he's just a figurehead. They've kind of backed off of me, but as soon as I start up again, they're going to start up again. And that's just kind of how it goes. But Jade Helm is the issue of the day.
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
I have to tell you, this is going to surprise you, Doug and Joe, and probably some people in the listening audience. Jade Helm is a big deal, but it's a paradox. It's also not a big deal. I wrote an article today where I tried to make the point that Jade Helm is the manifestation of what's already in place. In other words, we have 17 elements of martial law that we are already under. We fulfill every single mandate that martial law requires. It's already in place. It's sitting there and waiting, whether it's in the form of an executive order or a congressional action. It really doesn't matter. We have 17 elements, and Jade Helm is threatening to pull a lot of these, if not all of them, together.
In reading your article, Dave, I mean, some of these executive orders go back 30 years, 40 years, actually, to 1974. And I mean, so none of this is necessarily, this did not happen overnight. This didn't happen over the last 4 or 5 years. Now, granted, a lot did since 2001, but no, you had the infrastructure, the framework being built throughout the last almost half century.
Yes, but it's accelerated greatly since 2008. Since 2008, we've gotten Executive Order 13603, which is the takeover of everything, including conscripted slave labor. And folks, look it up. Go to the article. I link to it. You can look this up. Obama has set up the system. So when we go under his declaration of martial law, we will have civilian conscription and slave labor. You will not be paid. You will be sent wherever they want to send you. And that's recent. I believe that was 2010. And then you have the NDAA in 2011 and renewed again in 2012. The unlawful illegal detention without due process of American citizens. Obama's already killed 3 American citizens under the NDAA, and I documented that in today's article. So we already have these elements in place, and they have really snowballed since Obama's taken over. But you're right. You referred to legislation that's over 40 years old. I believe you're referencing the control of food as a weapon, and that was National Security Memorandum. Oh, gosh, the number just jumped out of my head without it in front of me. But it was devised by Henry Kissinger during the Nixon administration. It was National Security Memorandum 200, Implications of Worldwide Population Growth, and they talk about reducing the population in the third world. And I made the point that this program could just as easily be turned on Americans, and the data strongly suggests that that's already happened.
Exactly, yeah. And
that document talks about how, to genetically modify food to take nutrition out of it. And we see in America, I believe we're the number one genetically modified food producer. So yes, you're right, Dave. When you say it could easily be turned and implemented on Americans, it already has been, I believe.
Yeah,
well, it has. And you mentioned GMOs. Yeah, we're also the number one consumer. And what's interesting is Americans don't want GMOs, and yet, no pun intended, they're literally being forced down our throat against our will. And this, to me, is unconscionable. In fact, let's talk about the will of the people, our standing as citizens for a second. I was on a mainstream radio station in Houston last week ago Friday, and it was a business station. I believe the call numbers were 7:40 a.m., and I was on the drive home. I was on at 5 o'clock for about 15 minutes, so that it's kind of an unusual audience for someone like me to get on. I actually had 2 in the same day. I was on Fox up in Utah on the same day during their rush hour. And what was interesting about this Houston interview was the fact that they're letting me come on and talk about this because they're offended like I am. I'm an American citizen. I do not have a criminal record. I'm a productive member of society. I pay my taxes even though I don't agree with a lot of the taxes that I pay. I fulfill my civic duty. I do charity work, and I'm not perfect by any means whatsoever, but I am not someone that deserves to have my government spend my tax dollars practicing martial law to extract me and incarcerate me or even execute me on some red list because I've had the nerve to speak out about what's wrong in this country. I'm an American citizen practicing my First Amendment, and how dare these people and how dare these men who put on the uniform and swear an oath to protect and defend the Constitution do what they're doing right now where they're practicing extractions. Jade Helm is not starting on July 15th. It began in Fort Lauderdale on March 27th with the videos that are out where they're showing this as extraction drills. And gentlemen, speaking of extraction drills, talk about getting a nugget from the mainstream media. When I was on this station, the talk show host, Nick Rakovich, asked me, says, Dave, what do you think the purpose is? And I said, well, I would imagine you have a very conservative Republican audience here, and this is probably going to offend them. But this is all, you asked me the question, this is what I think. I think they're practicing for extraction of political dissidents in preparation for martial law. And he went on to tell me that they had just interviewed a deputy sheriff who's part of the local contingent for Jade Helm in the Houston area, and he said exactly the same thing.
Really?
And he's the drill. He's part of the drill. So we have an official admission that this is what this is about. And I am deep offended as an American.
Practice? No, I mean, are we talking practice extraction, or are we talking actual extraction of political?
Practice extraction. But you're familiar with the term snap exercise.
Right.
And for the listening audience, that may be a new term for you. What that means is a drill goes live like the 7/7 London bombings preparation, and then before you know, you've got London bombings on 7/7. And so that means a drill that's being practiced can go live. And I think there's a very good chance that Jade Helm is going to go live.
Okay, what would that mean? And I think our audience knows, but when you say go live, well, what would that look like? I suppose that's a better question, it going live. Do you mean that there would have to be something to happen to make it go live, or just go live on its own? Or
I think there'll be a precipitating incident, yes.
Okay, that's kind
and
of...
my best guess would be an economic collapse.
Okay.
And I think we would see food riots. I spoke to a farmer in Kansas a couple of days ago. I believe it was 2 days ago. And I've been doing a fair amount of reading. The figures the government's putting out on crop yields are absolute lie. I mean, they're telling more of the truth about the inflation rate and the unemployment rate than they are about crop yields. And we are dangerously close to having a negative productivity curve with regard to the needs of our population. And some people think we've already crossed that Rubicon. And what that spells are food shortages. And food shortages can lead to food riots. Hence, if this were to transpire during any phase of the Jade Helm drill, there you would have your excuse to begin what they're going to do. Now, I'm just putting that out there as a possible scenario. The other thing that, Doug, I think, and Joe, we need to look at is on November the 10th, Janet Yellen, head of the Federal Reserve, in a drill sponsored by the FDIC at the Bank of London, run by a guy, last name is Carney, and they had this drill, and they practiced for widespread banking failure. 6 days later, at the G20 conference in Seoul, South Korea, they declared our bank accounts not to be money, so therefore we're last in line to receive any FDIC compensation. I think a cyber attack upon the banks is a possibility, or just a good old-fashioned, hey, we're going to collapse now because we have a quadrillion-dollar derivatives debt. We've got a $240 trillion unfunded liabilities debt, such as Social Security, and I'm not saying people don't deserve it, but it is unfunded and it is a liability. And, of course, we have over an $18 trillion deficit. So when we look at these three numbers combined, I mean, the house of cards could come down at any time. And what really makes the food shortage situation, I think, likely with food riots is we eat 3,000-mile salads. And once you have a disruption in food distribution, you're going to have a disruption in distribution for everything in the economy. And the transportation is the key to us eating. And this whole thing, guys, we're setting up to go into some really dark days. I'm almost speechless here. I never thought I'd be living this time this soon. These were things we talked about 8-10 years ago. They were things off into the future. We better watch out because the warning signs are there on the horizon. Well, the warning signs are no longer there. They're right here, right amongst us. And there's any number of things that could bring this country down and lead to a pretext for martial law, hence Jade Helm enforcement.
All right. Dave, if you want to, for our listeners, and by the way, folks, Dave Hodges is our guest. His website, thecommonsenseshow.com. Also, radio broadcast heard every week, every Sunday night under the same name. If you want to, and you tell me if this is a good way to do this, let's describe what Jade Helm is purported to be and what the 17 characteristics, the martial law characteristics, take them one by one. Do you think that's a good way to approach this? Because some people...
I think it's a fine way to approach it. What we can tell you about Jade Helm is that what the government is saying is an absolute lie. They're lying on every single point about Jade Helm. The first thing they said was, well, this is only a 7-state drill. Well, not with the Fort Lauderdale extractions, not with the fact that I've got 4 reports from family members that the Michigan National Guard's going live on July 15th, not with the same drills being conducted in Connecticut. These drills are nationwide as we speak, and they've already started. They said these drills would run from July 15th, and they do real military training, a phrase they label as RMT, and they would do them from July 15th to September 15th. Well, then why is it that we have extraction drills on video from Fort Lauderdale on March 27th? I mean, who are they kidding here? They're lying through their teeth. When you look at the emblem for Jade Helm, it's almost like I'm trying to decode some kind of satanic cult code. It says it has these crossbows, and I've never seen that before. But the words below it are even more striking. It says, "Master the human domain."
Yeah, we saw
and I
that.
wrote an article, part of an article. Did you see that where I actually sunk my teeth into that phrase?
Yeah, we saw that article as well as on Friday. We had Nathan Leal from the Watchman's Cry or Watchman'sCry.com on, and he talked about that very phrase and dissected it in a very similar fashion, but got into the esoteric meaning of that. So, what were your findings from that Jade Helm logo?
Well, first of all, when
phrase?
you use the word master, that usually is a euphemism for overcome, or master as in a slave relationship. So those are the two most commonly applied definitions to the word master. The bizarre esoteric saying, a human domain. Who speaks that way? I mean, I've seen all kinds of military code operations and phrases. Master the human domain? Are you kidding me? I mean, that doesn't even make any sense. So I decided, let's break it down. Human domain. Well, what would be the opposite, the antonym of human domain? How about the unhuman domain? And the first thought that crossed my mind was, are they coming out in the open about the fact that this is actually satanic and these are the interests that they represent? I mean, that was my very first thought when I looked at that. They master the human domain. I think very clearly they're talking about mastering humans, in other words, enslaving humans where they live. That,
exactly.
I think, was the full translation of that. But I also think the fact that they used human domain, I don't come up to you on the street and say, "Hi, human, how are you?" We don't talk that way. Who would refer to us as humans? I would say it would be non-humans. So one thing that people would say, well, Dave, maybe it's ETs. Well, I don't see any evidence for that. Maybe, Dave, it's satanic, and I do see evidence for that. These people are occultists, and they're Satanists to their core.
Oh, amen, brother. Yeah, and you know, the military, the U.S. military, actually, and here's how far we got down in drilling down into this. The U.S. military, it seems, had coined or implemented the phrase human terrain. The U.S. Army, to be very specific, from military documents. Now, thinking back to Friday here, Jade Helm seems to be both cryptic as well as overt. In the human domain aspect, as you mentioned it, but one of the things that we talked about on Friday, and this is, I want to get your take on this as well. Phase zero. I don't know whether you know how much you got into that phase zero operation. Have you heard of that? Okay. Phase zero shaping. Okay, that was one phrase that we started looking into. Phase zero shaping. In traditional military missions, operations and war theaters are divided into 5 phases, from 1 to 5.
Okay. Where you're going with this now?
Yeah. So phase zero appears to be like a preemptive of the military strategy.
Correct.
So, you know, it seems to me that this whole thing is just really, as you put it, based in the, you know, people can make fun of this all they want, but when you start taking this apart and looking at it with a little, you know, closer approach here, it seems like we're really being lied to on multiple levels, and this is more than what it seems. Even if it doesn't manifest itself, you know, during the time period, certainly it to me anyway, there's more to it than what they're saying. So,
well, no, I agree with you. And when you talk about phase zero in terms of preliminary strategies here regarding a conquest, you're exactly right. If we were using battlefield terminology, this would be when you come in with your super weapons or your commandos on the ground and take out the command and control, you know, the eyes and ears of the surveillance and defense system of the enemy. In the case of Jade Helm, the analogy fits, but it's not about taking out radar. It's about taking out potential dissident leaders. And so prior to a declaration of martial law, and this is standard. I mean, martial law is implemented like this all across the planet and has been on multiple occasions. You come in and you arrest or execute the people who could cause you the most problems in a preemptive move prior to getting the people under the thumb of the government and martial law. And that's what I believe that we're seeing with Jade Helm. In fact, I watched a video that was shot by Aaron Dykes and Melissa Melton, and I watched it and watched it and watched it, and something was just striking me so odd that these helicopters, these black helicopters, were flying everywhere, but there was no corresponding ground action. And I thought, this is odd. Why are they landing out there in the middle of a field, and Aaron and Melissa just happened to be there to catch it? And then it hit me. They're landing in a field because they're practicing extractions, and they were either embarking or disembarking personnel in a drill fashion, and the reason they're in the middle of a field is because they want to do it outside the public purview. And this is what the Nazis did, and I'm going to tie two things together here with this drill. In fact, I got made fun of in the mainstream media. They didn't quote me directly or my website, but they took a phrase, the Washington Post and one of the Denver news stations, with articles that Google was pinning at the top on Jade Helm. They actually took one of my phrases, and they said I had talked about the fact that when did the Nazis do their extractions of the Jews? At 3 a.m. When is Jade Helm going to be active? At 3 a.m. They don't want to do this stuff in the public purview. And this is when I was watching Aaron and Melissa's film, I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, my goodness, here, this is just so odd. And then it just hit me like a ton of bricks. This is what they're doing. And they're going to roll the buses out there in the middle of the field, middle of the night, and this is when they're going to do their transfers of their prisoners. And that's what I knew what I was watching. Well, right after I saw that video, I think that was on a Wednesday, the 25th. On the 27th is when the Fort Lauderdale video came out. And it really confirmed my suspicions of what I was seeing. So Jade Helm is what you would call phase zero. It is a preemptive extraction drill of dissidents. Now, I think the drill is going to be a lot broader in scope. I think what we're right now is we're just seeing the tip of the iceberg. And right now the tip of the iceberg is the extraction of dissidents, you know, what Steve Quayle often refers to as the red list. And I heard him, and if people haven't heard that interview, they need to go to Alex Jones' second hour on April 1st and listen to Steve being interviewed by David Knight. Oh, my goodness. Here, Steve went through red list, blue list stuff and tied it into Jade Helm. He was right on the money because this is exactly what they're preparing for. They're not going to just take us out, Doug, and put us in FEMA camps. People like you and I, they want to shoot us in the back of the head.
Well, yeah. Stand in line for the number of people that want to do that. But what if, okay, I'm going to play the devil's advocate here just for a moment. What if nothing happens from this? I mean, what if we see September 16th, 17th, the operation has formally or officially closed, but nothing happened? It was just a drill. Everything was just what the government said it was going to be. Are they conditioning us, or what are they doing?
Yeah, I believe so. But what a great way to discredit the alternative media. But I raised that point in my article this morning. I made the point here, and I'm paraphrasing what I wrote, that whether or not Jade Helm 15 goes live or not is irrelevant because something will follow in its place. Militaries drill for reasons. And they're drilling for what they are reasonably assuming is what's going to be their tasked duty. So if it's not Jade 15, it's going to be something on the heels of Jade 15. So Jade Helm 15, whether it goes live or not, but I think there's a real good chance. Look, I'm telling you right now, I'd bet my bottom dollar right now, if we have a precipitating major catastrophe in this country, particularly one involving the economy, and Jade Helm is going to be put into motion to defend people from civil unrest. And this is when the extractions will start, and what a great way to cover up what you're doing. To go into civil unrest, and you extract 15, 30, 50, 100 people from a particular area, who will ever notice in the midst of the chaos?
Yeah, well, that's pretty true. Except when they turn to alternative media, for example, how can they cover this? In other words, it would almost. It seems to me that there would almost have to be something that would be concurrent with the exercise, or precipitate. There would have to be some monumental type of an event to really get people off balance.
Well, I would agree with the event, but I'll also give you something that will go hand in hand with this. You and I won't disappear from the airwaves. The airwaves have already been disappeared from us, and this was the purpose of net neutrality. That's why they had to do it by administrative fiat. They couldn't put this into Congress. Even if they could have got it passed, there would have been months of debate. And see, the fact that they ramrodded this through so quickly by administrative fiat, it's illegal for the FCC to make law. And that's exactly what they did. The FCC made law, and basically it says that Obama can take over any radio station, internet, force any website off the net. They can do anything they want with regard to all communication being controlled now through net neutrality. And, Doug, I'm telling you that if this drill does go live, the first casualty will be off the air. And I think very quick.
I agree with that. I agree with the communication.
Yeah, because here's what they can't have. Can you imagine if we were raptured in reverse? That you wake up tomorrow on a Monday morning, for example, and Dave Hodges wasn't on the show the night before, and Doug hasn't been on for a few days, and Steve Quayle stopped publishing on his website, and no one knows where John B. Wells is. Can you imagine the public outcry? They don't want to alert people like that. So first they've got to take us off the air, and then they're going to extract us.
Okay. All right. And that makes more sense.
It does. Either that or a complete lights-out scenario where nobody has any access would be the only way.
But that would mean commerce going down. I mean, everything would have to go down.
Right.
Well,
I mean, those are the two options I see. What Dave just described.
Yeah.
And that, or everybody's in the dark.
Well, hold that thought a minute. Dave, have we ever seen operations like this before anywhere? Because I know you've done so much research on this. Have we ever seen military operations like this on American soil at this level, at this scope, at any other time in history?
No, not at this scope, and not the depth and the breadth of this exercise is beyond parallel. Alex Jones did some excellent work back in the early 2000s, accompanying Northcom when they were doing their fake gun confiscations and initiating martial law. We've seen those kinds of drills for some time now, but they've been bits and pieces. What we can say for sure is Jade Helm is an extraction of dissidence drill. They've tipped their hand. There's no denying what's out there. We have an official admission of this from a participant in the drill. The fact that they're doing the drill in the middle of the night, suspicious. The other thing they're doing that I think bears mentioning here, and this is greatly concerning to me, is that the Joint Operations Special Forces are going into county commissioners of these small rural Texas areas and then even some of the bigger counties, and they're bribing them by paying each county $150,000 for the disruptions that are coming. And they say you'll hear live fire, you're going to have helicopters buzzing your houses at night. Who the heck gives them the right to do that to a community? Disrupt people's sleep patterns, scare the crap out of people. I'm worried about some 85-year-old lady getting a heart attack because she doesn't know what's going on. But the county commissioners all throughout Texas are basically selling out their communities. And when I was on that Houston station, I implored the local people. I said, if your county commissioner has voted for this and taken this money, throw them out. If you have a recall petition available, you have that right to recall public officials, do so immediately if they've agreed to that. That's the one hold people have on this right now where they could stop this. They could stop these drills if you could get the county commissioners not to go along with it.
What excuse, what reason has the military given for these drills? Now, I know what they're saying on within the media and on the websites, but but tell us. I mean, why do they need to practice? Why do they need to do this on American soil in these particular states? Why there? Why now? And what's the general purpose of this? Their narrative, their story.
Well, they're first using the phrase RMT, which stands for Real Military Training. And that's prominently displayed and mentioned and re-mentioned again in their 7-page initial release. Real military training. Well, they also claim that this prepares their soldiers for fighting in foreign environments. Well, it's not foreign environment when you're invading the United States of America. Where in the Middle East are you going to find the state of Texas? And see, they're in all kinds of climate zones in Texas, all kinds of topography in Texas. It's not like we're fighting to chase ISIS into Syria, which mostly be desert or arid land fighting. This makes absolutely no sense. One of the things that we should also mention is that when you go to the map for Jade Helm 15, they list on there a color code of 7 states. And Texas is listed as a, quote, hostile state, unquote. Utah is listed as a hostile state. Southern California is also color-coded red, which means they're considered to be a hostile state. Who is the government to come in and say Texas is hostile? Well, I know why they're doing it. I mean, look at their flag. Come and take it? Yeah, you're not getting our guns. And Texans have more secessionist movements from the federal government than anybody else in the country. So I understand why they're doing Texas. Texas would be a tough nut to crack for the federal government. But then when I was on this Fox station in Utah a week ago last Friday, they asked me the same question. And by the way, it was a 10-minute interview that went 50 minutes. And it just, let's put it this way. Mainstream Fox kept Dave Hodges over to talk about conspiracy. You could have knocked me over with a feather, because you and I both know we don't get this kind of treatment in the mainstream media very often. And they asked me that question. They said, why Utah, Dave? And I said, look, I had the privilege and pleasure, and I said, I'm not LDS and Mormon. I have philosophical religious difference, but I have a deep appreciation and respect for the family values, the cohesiveness that people display towards their religion, their sense of community service given the missions that they go on, their emphasis on education, just good, wholesome American values. And I said, I grew up with a lot of Mormon kids in my neighborhood, and I came to respect and love them. And I said, I'm telling you right now that if this federal government makes the bishops up there in Utah mad, the whole state of Utah is going to move. I said, these people are in conjunction and unison with each other. Yes, you have individual differences, but the Mormon Church can unify that state, can unify more than Utah. But I understand why the federal government did it, because if they come in and think they're going to take guns, if they come in and think they're going to dictate that the Christian religion is passé and we're not going to allow the Christian religion, you're going to have these people standing up en masse, I think, like no other place in the country, maybe other than Texas. And that's why I think those two areas were chosen to be a hostile state for this drill. In other words, they're going to do civilian suppression. They're going to do civilian relocation. That's what you would do in a hostile state in a civil war situation. And then they asked me the question, well, what about Southern California? And I said, well, that's an interesting fact to consider. I said, what do you have in Southern California that is unique compared to the rest of the country? Well, you've got a large percentage of the population that English is their second language, but I don't think that's a factor here. I said, you also have a huge contingent of military bases, particularly naval. And I said, the one branch of the military that Obama does not have a good grip on is the Navy, and in particular, it's the nuclear submarine fleet. And I said, I suspect that they're going to view some of these potential Navy personnel, Marines, I think they're going to look at them as people that may not go along with the plan and actually stand up to the subjugation of this country. That's why they're on the red list. That would be my best guess.
Interesting reasoning, and logical as well. Okay. Wow. All right. What about that area, that particular area? I'm looking at the article that you wrote right now, and I thought you had a map on there. Okay, it must be on the other article.
Yeah, it's on the other articles about the color code.
Yeah, there's that one area. Did I just wink out there? That little area that it's not hostile, but it's worse than hostile. That little area. It's like
a LOS or some kind of odd designation with a square.
Yes.
And it's near St. George, Utah.
Okay. Yeah. What is that?
Well, that's interesting you'd bring that up. I have not been able to find out what it is, but I will tell you that Kay, and I forget her last name, the Fox talk show host that interviewed me, she actually brought that up, and she said that we feel that we have martial law drills going on right now in St. George, Utah. Okay. And that was mentioned to me. I've not been able to confirm that, and I really haven't spent a lot of time. But yes, if you look at that map, the map does have that little square, and that is in the vicinity of St. George. So I don't know if that's accurate or not, but there's something going on there. I will tell you that through the years, and I mean the last 2 years, I've had a fair number of people tell me in the St. George area that there's a contingent of Russians that have moved into their area, just like I've reported on this show in Gatlinburg, Tennessee, or Ketchikan, Alaska. We are seeing Russians infiltrating there, and I probably have had, I'd say maybe 5 or 6 emails over the last 2 years detailing this as I've covered Russians. And what I suspect, Doug, and I don't think I can say I can prove it, although the indicators are really there, I believe the Russians are going to be part of these extraction drills for all the obvious reasons. And let me tell you what I can base this on from a preponderance of the evidence for this belief. The Russians should never have been involved in Grid X2, which was the simulated EMP takedown drill of the United States back in November 13th of 2013. I mean, we basically showed them how to man get the keys to the car, how our grid works, and this is at a time when Putin was threatening to actively nuke us if we went into Syria or threatened Iran. But we let the Russians and the Chinese into Grid X2. And then in 2014, the RIMPAC war games, which are practicing against Russian and Chinese tactics in the Pacific, this 12-nation, multinational drill, we let the Russians and the Chinese in on that one too. So why wouldn't we let them in on Jade Helm? So just logic tells you that I believe the Russians are going to be involved in this drill. And if there are Russians in St. George, Utah, and it corresponds to some nefarious Jade Helm 15 drill as indicated on this map, it's a short leap of logic.
Well, right, and we're talking something that goes far beyond mutual aid training, the type of training. This, although it might appear under that pretext, it certainly is convoluted logic at best, and certainly nefarious. I mean, at its core, to me, anyway. One thing I thought was interesting in your article of April 6th, which is today, of course. And folks, I would urge everyone to go to thecommonsenseshow.com and read the 17 things you can count on when Jade Helm 15 goes live. One thing I thought was pretty interesting. You write, America is already under martial law, which is true. I mean, the orders, executive orders, they're already in place. Jade Helm 15 will not bring martial law to America. It's already here. It's let me see here. Where did I see that here? Because I thought it was an excellent. Okay, in some ways you're right. Jade Helm 15 is an extension of an obscure program that is still in place, and it is known as Plan C. Now, this is something I haven't seen anywhere else. You really drilled down to get this. If you want to expand on this, because I thought this is a very interesting backdrop to what we're seeing right now, this Plan C. Can you? Yeah,
it's a group in I think it was the 80s, if I remember right. You write so many articles, Doug, they start to run together unless you have them right in front of you. But this group called Muckrock, under Freedom of Information, got a hold of what was Plan C. Now, Plan C doesn't really bother me that much. It was 1956. It was the Cold War, and if nuclear war was imminent, they were going to seize all the foreign embassies of our enemies, arrest the personnel, search the premises for intelligence information that would do us good in time of war, and then they had plans to arrest just under 13,000 people who they considered to be un-American. And you got to remember, we were just coming off the Red Scare and McCarthyism and so forth and so on, and that paranoid thinking was with us. 13,000, not a big deal, until you go forward to the 1980s, and they changed and morphed the program into what's been called the main core. And the main core, we've been able to find out from Freedom of Information, had 8 million names on it. So they went from 13,000 names in 1956 to, I believe, in 1988, we had a list of 8 million Americans. Can you believe how much bigger that list must be today?
Well, and that brings me to this question: with that many, we'll say we'll go with a conservative 10 million. Okay, and folks, Dave Hodges doesn't get into Plan C, giving way to Main Core. Main Core is a massive database that began in the 80s by the federal government. Just to be clear, this program consists of gathering personal and financial data of millions of U.S. citizens believed to be threats to national security. So we're talking about involvement with the NSA, the FBI, the CIA, other agencies. So let's just say 10 million as a conservative number as potential threats to national security, quote unquote, today. That conservative number. I mean, how? That's a heck of a job to extract or to otherwise deal with that number, wouldn't it? I mean, you'd have to have. I mean, it's. How would they do that?
Well, it's not 8 million. The list of undesirables in this country, from what I've been told, is approaching 100 million. Now, I don't mean they're red listed, going to take you out and shoot you in the head, but there have been people that have been tagged, and I've been told it's up to 100 million Americans now.
Okay, and, well, that brings me to a logistics or a logical question.
You're looking at, I mean, if you think about the extraction teams, and these might only be used for, in the beginning, as you said, certain personnel that they view as maybe, I don't know, the leaders or whoever can affect the most change or whoever people would gravitate to in a time of unrest. But you got to look at 4 or 5 people at least per team to extract one person just to play it safe. That, like you said, that's a logistical nightmare. Unless you look at other countries being involved, the possibility of foreign militaries being involved too.
I don't know if they're going to extract 100 million people. Okay, I think it's safe to say they're going to extract tens of thousands for sure in a preemptive move to martial law. There's no question they're going to do that. Everything that you read leads you to believe, at least leads me to believe, that that's going to happen. I don't know that they're going to pull 8 million out, 10 million, 20 million, but, this would be a good time to bring this up. And I'm not changing the topic because I think this is a parallel path that's very germane. Here's a question I get that's written to me every day, and it's written by people who really aren't that familiar with my work, or they wouldn't be asking the question. How can we, on one hand, be preparing for World War III, yet on the other hand, in 2011, Obama signed a FEMA bilateral agreement with the Russian Defense Ministry to allow the first 15,000 Russian soldiers to come in the country? See, we don't need to have anecdotal eyewitness accounts or pictures or videos that might have been doctored, as I've been accused of doing. We have official government documents, and we have official government statements that these Russians are here, and you can get your hands on the documents and read them. Now, why would Obama be playing both sides against the middle? Because the year is 1987, and the movie is America with a K, and that's who Obama is. Obama is a traitor to this country. And we covered this a couple of years ago on your show, guys, and I think it bears repeating. Obama's real mother is Ann Dunham. She worked for Tim Geithner's father at the CIA MK Ultra PSYOPs known as the Ford Foundation. Obama's half-brother, also known to be at the same location, is Malik Obama. I've got a picture of the two of them together on my website in 2 locations. Malik Obama is the head of the Muslim Brotherhood procurement for finance and for arms. And then you've got his real father, Frank Marshall Davis, and we're all friends with Larry Grathwohl, the late Larry Grathwohl, and the great work that he did on this, as well as Joel Gilbert, in which they established that Frank Marshall Davis was on the FBI most watched list. I believe it was for either 17 or 19 years. He was an avowed communist. Obama was raised by communists to be a communist, but who launched Obama's political career? None other than Bill Ayers and Bernadine Dorn. And who were they? The head of the Weatherman Underground. And let's go back to something that Larry Grathwohl said on my show on 2 separate interviews, where Larry said that when he penetrated the Weatherman Underground as an FBI special informant, he asked Bill Ayers, he said, what would happen if you guys actually win? In other words, a communist takeover of the country. And what was Bill Ayers' response? He said, well, we probably would have to incarcerate, now remember, these are 1970s numbers, incarcerate 50 million Americans, and we'll have to get rid of, meaning exterminate, over half of those people, and these re-education camps will be in the Southwest. And so here's what an FBI special informant said. And then you look at who else was involved in the Weatherman Underground. Well, a guy named Vernon Jarrett. Who's he? The father-in-law of senior White House advisor Valerie Jarrett. These people were red diaper babies. They weren't hippies protesting the Vietnam War. They were Ivy League graduates with master's degrees. Bill Ayers' father, Tom Ayers, was the head of Con Ed, for goodness sake. So these people were actively fermenting a communist takeover of this country. They actually advocated using foreign troops to help carry this out. The Cubans, the North Vietnamese, the Russians, the Chinese, they were looking for anybody. And, Jane Fonda was not a member of this group, but she was of the same exact mindset. But the bottom line is, Obama's a communist. He was endorsed by the Communist Party prior to the 2008 election. Bill Ayers still visits the White House. And then if you look at his policies, and I'm sure everyone listening tonight who's a member of the shrinking middle class would agree that Obama's done nothing for the American middle class. All his policies are collectivism, it's social justice, it's communism. Obama is a plant to hand this country off to a communist type of dictatorship, which is why on one hand he's weakening the military as we're preparing to go to war, and that's going to come after martial law. And then on the other hand, he's bringing in foreign troops into this country to subjugate American citizens under martial law, and that's why he's allowing the Russians in. Now, I'm sorry for the long-winded explanation, but I don't think you can really understand the current events of today without understanding Obama's duplicitous motives.
You know what, Dave? That was a brilliant explanation, because we get the same questions, but about parallel topics. For example, how can it appear that the United States is fighting so hard to keep alive the petrodollar when, in fact, it's our claims and it's other people's claims that the power elite, the global elite, they're trying to tank it, they're trying to take it down, they're trying to destroy the U.S. dollar as the world's reserve currency, or destroy the U.S. dollar, period. And I think the same applies, the same logic, the same template applies to that, as you so eloquently explained there. And if you look back to 2008, this will give people the context. When we brought out in 2008, and others brought out, that Obama doesn't have any bona fides, and everything that he appears to be is a legend, and by legend I mean a CIA creation, if you will, then it does appear that we have been taken over from within by Obama, and not just Obama, but the people that he brought in and the people that surround him and the people that essentially brought him in.
I've got a trivia question for you guys. Who was Obama's Soviet instructor at Occidental College?
Brzezinski. Bingo.
Good job. You win the prize. But if you haven't heard that, and I'm speaking to our listeners, I want you to just imagine, we know what Brzezinski is. He was co-founder of the Trilateral Commission. He basically wrecked the economy of this country under the Carter administration when he served as National Security Advisor, where he had undue influence. This is the guy who helped groom, another communist helped groom Obama. I mean, if you look at who his mentors were, one of his mentors for community service was a guy named Krulik, Mike Krulik, and the administration tried to distance themselves from him because the guy is an avowed communist. But Mike Krulik actually had his picture taken at the White House with Obama, and I got a copy and happily put it on my website. But who's Mike Krulik? Well, first, he was Obama's mentor in his community activism on social justice, which is another communist term. But who is Mike Krulik today? He's leading something called Build One America, and all the globalists are behind it. I mean, from Valerie Jarrett to Bill Gates to them all, they've all endorsed this. And it's showing up in American communities under Agenda 21 policies like Bay Area 1, which basically are the micro apartments, the 300 to 500 square foot micro apartments, no private transportation, only public transportation, controlling of all your electronics and your utilities and so forth. And they're also doing in the Minneapolis area, and you people who live up there in Minneapolis, St. Paul need to look into this. What they're doing is redistributing suburban tax wealth to inner cities to where your streets are going to be crumbling. They're going to want you to pay a higher gas tax out in the suburbs than you pay in the inner city. They're basically trying to force people into the stack and packs in Minneapolis, and Mike Krulik's behind this. and another communist, and a communist bringing us really hardline Agenda 21 policies, and that's who's underlining. And I'll go one step further with this, and since we're playing, scare the crap out of them radio here, and I don't mean to do that, but this is the way it lays out, guys. If you go to a website called America2050.org, it's Mike Krulig's creation, but it has the endorsement of all the major globalists. And what they show as an end result by 2050 is 11 communities, similar to the Hunger Games, 11 districts, 11 communities, each populated by 6 million Americans in these extreme Agenda 21 policies I've just mentioned. Now let's do the math. You have 11 communities in America, major urban areas, 6 million people. That's 66 million people. Where in the world are the other 315 million people? I mean, you're missing 250 million. I mean, guys, let's just do the math here. And I've actually written an article about this. I said, where are 250 million Americans going to disappear to? And this is a guy who's an ally with Obama. I think the implications are clear.
Yeah, I mean, think about that just for a moment. That's what was that website again? America 2050?
America2050.org. I'll look it up during a break, but
wow.
And I'm quoting from memory, and I wrote the article over a year ago, but I think I'm right. I think it's America2050.org. They've got maps like you wouldn't believe. They've got economic distribution maps, population distribution maps. They've got transportation corridors, which are basically the NAFTA-CAFTA superhighways that are coming in under these international agreements. I mean, it's the full meal deal about what the globalists want to do to America. And if you go to Deagle, here's another thing with Deagle. Man, is this unbelievable. Our GDP right now is $18 trillion. What Deagle is predicting by 2025, and they're a CIA front group, by 2025 they're saying our GDP will be about $970 billion.
So that's, a cut of...
That's post-World War III catastrophic destruction.
Okay.
In fact, I should probably say it too, Doug. My scenario is false flag, martial law, and then World War III. And this is the reunification the globalists want, the big picture. And in the final phases, we'll see enslavement of the 10% of the humans they let continue to live while they practice their transhumanism and try to achieve eternal life. I mean, this is, if you look at big picture, the umbrella over all this is where I see this heading.
Okay. And just, folks, let those numbers sink in for a moment and understand what Dave is saying. I mean, not only the hit to the GDP, but where did all the people go in the other architecture of the future? Engineering of the future. My goodness, those questions.
Where'd the money go? Where'd the people go? And then they have a military per capita expenditure, and they do then and now, and I forget the number now. I'd have to go look it up, but it's gone down just as dramatically. In other words, we're going to basically be stripped of our military by the year 2025, according to Deagle. And people say, Deagle is a bunch of crap. Well, really, the CIA uses them as a front group to put out information, and they have for 20 years. So I take what they say very seriously. And when you overlay the reduction in GDP in this country and military expenditures in this country with the Deagle report, and you go to America2050.org and look at the population reduction, you start to see some striking parallels.
You know what, Dave? I find this very interesting, is all of this information is out there for people to research. You do it, others have done it, we do it, and you can report on it. And the information is being written out there. No one is hiding this information. Yet when you point people to this information, people have been so programmed, so conditioned to automatically say, wait a minute, this is just nonsense. This is conspiracy nonsense. It's amazing to me that all of this is documented, and why not? People are not. I mean, there's cognitive dissonance here. They're not connecting to what is being reported. I mean, all the plans are being made in plain sight, and people are just denying the obvious, which I just find, disturbing, I suppose.
And we're at the top of the hour, Dave. But on the other side, I want to come back to the page 11 out of page 12 of the Jade Helm martial law. document with the Master of the Human Domain logo. I want to come back to that. There's that shoe in the middle of the graphic there, and I want to kind of ask your opinion about, we talked about what the human domain, Master of the Human Domain could mean, and I want to get your take on what the logo is about. You're listening to the Hagmann Hagmann Report with our guest, Dave Hodges. His website is thecommonsenseshow.com. Bookmark that site and listen to or download his podcast or listen to him live. He's on live every Sunday night. And that's, again, Dave Hodges, thecommonsenseshow.com. And you're listening to the Hagmann Hagmann Report on this Monday, April 6, 2015, our day after Easter today. I hope everybody had a great holiday. We'll be right back, ladies and gentlemen, to hour number 2 on this Monday, April 6, 2015. Our guest tonight is Mr. Dave Hodges. His website, thecommonsenseshow.com. Go to his website now and click on the article. I think it's the third one down right now. 17 things you can count on when Jade Helm 15 goes live. We're talking about this tonight and all things Jade Helm 15. We're looking at personnel. We're looking at Dave has actually a great list in his articles, and it goes through 17 different things: mass roundups, curfews, food rationing, seizing control over food and water, prohibiting movements, things that you see in this is a
very well documented
law drill.
Very well documented.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and that's one thing, folks. Dave Hodges is a researcher extraordinaire, and I'm not trying to flatter him. If you look at his articles and look at the depth of footnotes, or look at the depth of documentation that he's got, it's difficult to argue on an intellectual level with the documentation that he brings to the table. So I just want to thank him for that, and back it up. I mean, we have been subjected to incremental fascism, if you will, for the last half a century, or century even, based on all of these laws, all of these regulations. They're stifling, and we know
the things they've been doing behind the laws.
No,
the food and water and air infiltration with poison, the population control. And there's an article today, actually, I saw. UN climate change official says we should make every effort to depopulate the planet. And there's countless articles like this that we could go over. And this Jade Helm 2015. I guess the question is, Dave, as you write in your title here, 17 things you can count on when Jade Helm 15 goes live. Well, I guess we'll go back to the master domain picture, the human domain picture, but what are the chances of this going live? As you point out in the first hour, there would have to be some kind of event that would happen. Are we looking at this?
I believe there's got to be an event that would cause an emergency situation, and Jade Helm would just, like the London bombings of 7/7, just go live. But, and I want to say this again. If it's not Jade Helm 15 that goes live, it's going to be something on its heels. You don't practice for something in terms of these martial law extraction drills and then come and do them 10 years later. So right now, trouble is with us. I mean, we need to look at this as these dangers are immediate because they're drilling for these things as we speak. As far as the logo goes, guys, all I have are shots in the dark, and I don't think my original assessment is the best assessment out there. I heard Steve Quayle, when he was on Alex's show, he said Jade refers to the Chinese, and I go, yeah, right, that's right, Steve. I hadn't thought about that. And so it could be Chinese at the helm in the year 2015. So I've always believed that the Chinese will be involved in martial law as well, too. They own our debt, and they want to assume control of this country and its resources. So I think Steve's notion it could be Chinese is a good one. But what I originally said was this. The foot that separates the two arrows, I wondered if that meant broken arrow. And if you're familiar with military technology, broken arrow means that the perimeter of a defensive position for a military unit has been overrun, and they're calling in for an airstrike on their own position because it's the only chance they have of surviving. And I'm wondering if the broken arrow, as I interpreted, could mean that America's been overrun. And that was my initial guess. Like I said, I don't think it's the best guess that's out there. Wow. I think Steve's notion of the Chinese involvement with the word Jade, I think that's probably a pretty good one. Some people suggested to me the shoe there, the foot, represents the people, but I'm not sure how that would relate to the overall scheme of things.
Well, see, that's what gets me is a shoe. That shoe's just so out of place. And ever since I've seen this document and have been looking at it, that's bothered me since the first time I've seen it. And I can't understand what that shoe is there for. Whether it's silly or not, I don't know, but it has a purpose, and I guess we need to find out what that purpose is. And why it's going to
come to us, whether it comes to us in a dream or sudden divine insight. It's going to come to us. But someone certainly put a lot of effort to making this very esoteric.
Well,
there's symbolism we're not seeing, and I think that clearly, I think it's a message to the elite somewhere, whether they're satanic or Masonic or whatever they could be. I have no idea. But there are clearly inside messages being delivered here that the public is not privy to.
Well, if you, and Nathan Leal on Friday had talked about this, and we had talked about this openly Friday, if you do contextualize the logo or even the phrase Jade Helm, Helm, as you pointed out, and he pointed out as well, it means to be in control, but what about China? If you look at China, then consider Sun Tzu, many writings about war, the art of war, of course, being the classic one, the 36 stratagems of war. One of the stratagems is to toss out a brick to get a jade gem. In other words, to bait someone by making him believe he gained something or just make him react to it. In other words, tossing out a brick, and then obtain something valuable from him in return.
And that goes in with that phase zero shaping,
right?
That we talked about on Friday. But this is, if you look at the document, this is it's an 8-week joint military interagency unconventional warfare exercise. And the words unconventional warfare stick out to me. And you have airborne division, 82nd Airborne Division, interagency partners they list, Navy SEALs, Green Berets, Marines and U.S. Air Force Special Operations involvement. What they list as realistic military training, they say that they need to be conducted on outside of federally owned property. You were talking about the local infusion of money to local economies for them, allowing these drills to take place in their local communities. And in the document, as you stated, it's $150,000 for each community. And they explain this away by this being the local footprint of meals and housing and such for the people who are taking place in or conducting the drills.
Yes.
Do you see how this would be used for a separate reason than what they're listing? I mean, is this for the local police forces to stay out of their way? I mean, there's a lot here to dissect, and what they talk about, how civilians will be, they say, in parts of the document, they will not be affected by the training, and in other parts they said, loud noise. And
that's what Dave was saying about tossing money at the community leaders there.
I mean, it'd have to be, but is that enough money to keep a town quiet when stuff like this is going on?
I don't know about the town, but the leaders, yeah. And I wish I had the article in front of me because I don't at the moment. You can Google this pretty easily. There was a county, and I want to say it started with a C, and that's my best recollection, but they interviewed one of the county commissioners on what he thought about this drill and the fact that they had accepted $150,000. And he goes, well, we're happy to do anything to help the military.
Uh-huh.
It's kind of like wave the flag and anything goes.
We enjoy our servitude. And I understand that patriotic bias, which is good to have. Don't get me wrong, but you also have to look at this from a number of different angles. And one of the bothersome things to me is the lack of any type of U.S. military training outside of the bases here in the United States. Urban military training is troublesome to me. But before we get into that, I just we had again last week we had talked about the NDAA budget, which includes, and this is interesting. I'm not sure, Dave, if you heard about this. Section 1074. You had talked about the human domain phrase. Well, Section 1074 of the NDAA budget for this current fiscal year is the pilot program for the Human Terrain System. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that.
I've heard it. Yes, isn't that interesting? Okay. What a parallel.
Well, right, and it requires the Secretary of the Army to conduct a pilot program to utilize the Human Terrain System assets. Now, this is for the U.S. Pacific Command area of responsibility to support, and this is another phrase, zero shaping operations, and supports the theater security cooperation plans of the geographic combatant commander. So, in other words, you're looking at two different, two phrases here, the Human Terrain System and phase zero shaping, which suggests also, in addition to extraction, insertion well before the exercise of plants, if you will, or people that, I don't want to say saboteurs, but surveillance, reconnaissance type of individuals into groups, into, I mean, think of it this way. You've got a local patriot group in, Austin, Texas, for example, or Houston, Texas. Well, wouldn't phase zero indicate, or something to that effect, indicate some sort of infiltration of that group to identify the leaders and to pick them out and say, hey, these are the ones. I mean, although they've got this information, at least give them updated information or good. I know in law enforcement, it's basically it's called now the phrase escapes me, but it's up to the minute information about the military or about the leaders of the organization. It's contemporaneous. I mean, it's right now. It's active. Yeah, they're the leaders are John Doe and Jane Doe, and they live at this location. They operate out of this site here. I mean, they verify everything that's in the database. But anyway, so I just thought that was rather interesting that how this all interconnects to the NDAA.
Yeah, that's the use of human terrain is fascinating to me. That was a good catch on your part there. You said something. I want to reflect back to what you played at the top of the hour break. You had a clip from Ted Broer. And, I've been on Ted's show as he's guest hosted for Joyce Riley, and everybody needs to say their prayers there. But Ted and I have gotten to know each other, and it's his contention that the takedown, as you heard, is going to occur through medical martial law, and that's my number 2 choice. After the economy, and spin off into food shortages, medical martial law is my second choice. I wrote about this during the Ebola scare. In fact, I wish I had the article up in front of me right now, but I had done some research where Obama had declared that he could basically quarantine everybody. I mean, you could have asthma symptoms or a chest cold, and you could be quarantined. So I dug into the details of the executive order that he put out on this, and I found it to be frightening because they were containment camps. I mean, they were containment camps, and then they had a list of partners, people who were going to participate in the drill, and they had all the usual suspects like DHS and FEMA and the Department of Defense, but there was something conspicuously missing from medical quarantine that Obama set up. And I hope you guys are sitting down when I tell you this. What was missing is there was not one word of any kind of medical presence. Nothing from the National Institute of Health, nothing from the CDC, even private organizations like Doctors Without Borders were not mentioned. It was all military and paramilitary in these medical quarantine camps that this executive order set up during the height of the Ebola scare. That speaks volumes to me, and it speaks to the potential that Ted could be right.
Well, one thing that you and I never talked about, and forgive me if we're going too far off script or off tangent here. There is no script, but off tangent. Remember back right after 9/11, the anthrax attacks of late 2001, 2002. Yeah, that still bothers me. The fact that really we don't know much. I mean, we know a few things, but we know more about what didn't happen and who didn't do it than we know about who did do it and why it happened. Do you have any comments on that? I know we're going back in history a ways, but I think if we keep that in the back of our minds, we perhaps that might be a puzzle piece.
The anthrax scare solidified in my mind that 9/11 was a false flag attack. And you got to remember, we were still gathering data during that time. We didn't know about the temperature that steel girders melt at and the jet fuel temperature and all that. That was stuff that we were just discovering. But to me, when I looked at 9/11, it struck me as odd. And then when we had the follow-up anthrax scares, I go, okay, that's the follow-up punch to 9/11, trying to scare the heck out of us to start a Middle East conflict or to justify one. That's when it really came together for me. And that's what I think the purpose was. I think it was nothing more than a thinly veiled, contrived false flag attack.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, it's always bothered me, and it still does. That does make sense. You know, I don't. It seems to be very clumsy in terms of how it was executed and even how it was handled afterwards. But that's just me. Okay, interesting. All right. Where else do we go from here? I mean, there's just so much that's going on, Dave. And you're just a wealth of information. Your website, folks, Dave Hodges' website, thecommonsenseshow.com. It's linked off of our website, Hagmann.com. Definitely bookmark it and check it every day. This guy, Dave Hodges, is a prolific writer, and he documents everything he researches. I did say that correctly. So, I mean, he's just an amazing source of information. The guy is tireless in his reporting. But Dave, direct us here as we sit around this conference table here in our studio, just talking.
Well, okay, we've covered the mass roundup of political dissidents. We've got the dusk to dawn curfews, which parallels Jade Helm's announced intentions to drill at night. And anyone who knows history should be concerned because, you know, both the KGB and the Gestapo did their extractions at night. Then you get into the rationing of essential resources. And this is where it gets really interesting. We already mentioned, you know, control of food and water through National Security Memorandum 200, but then you get into Executive Order 13603. And I have been beating this drum for 3 years now. People really need to sink their teeth into 13603. Let me just read to you just a small verbatim quote from, I don't think I have the section listed here, but it says, paragraph A. It says, food resources means all commodities and products, simple, mixed, or compound, or complements to such commodities or products that are capable of being ingested by either humans or animals, irrespective of other uses to such commodities or products, may be put at all stages of processing from the raw community to the products thereof. And I'm reading verbatim, and I know this is government lingo here, but it also goes on to say that food resources, and they define it as packaged foods, marketable containers, blah, 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 and then it says all under the control of the federal government. And then they define what a food resource facility is. They will control all fertilizer, and that's in paragraph F. Well, kind of hard to raise crops if the government's controlling all the fertilizer. So the government's positioned itself with 13603 to use food as a weapon. They're garnering control of all food. And then under FEMA regulations, they can come into your home and take food. See, this will all be part of the martial law process, because if you don't do what you're told, you people think you might rise up in mass and arm yourselves, but we'll starve you to death. We'll do just what Stalin did, you know, to Ukraine. And then you get into the prohibitions of weapons of any kind, including guns, knives, chemicals. Well, you know, this is the one, and this is the one I did not mark as a yes. The only one of the 17 is I put as in progress, because Obama has really made surprisingly little headway on gun confiscation. And he's done some things with AR-15 ammunition. He's done a few things, but he really has been negated and blunted in terms of gun confiscation. But there's something that no one's talking about, and this is very disturbing. And I want to read to you 2 short paragraphs here. It says, there is one concerning act involving the Secretary of State, John Kerry, and President Obama that was both illegal and unconstitutional with regard to the signing of the UN Small Arms Treaty, which effectively bans all private ownership of guns. And there is one provision of the treaty that's received absolutely no attention in our mainstream media, and that is the section having to do with confiscation. And the UN refers to this process as the ATT, so that means gun confiscation. And in the quote here from the UN, it says state parties to the ATT. State parties means nations. State parties to the ATT may seek assistance. That means bringing in other foreign entities. And it says may seek assistance in implementing the treaty. The ATT indicates that a voluntary trust fund was established to promote the establishment of a multinational gun confiscation program. These are the words right off the UN website with regard to the Small Arms Treaty. We are a signatory illegally, because all treaties have to come out of a two-thirds approval of the Senate, which Obama just said, well, we're not going to do that. John Kerry, go sign this, and now we're a member. So Obama here, on his own say-so, can say this is UN Small Arms Treaty, and this is another reason to validate the fact that it's going to be foreign troops going door to door, because they'll have no compunction to shoot American citizens who resist.
Now, it's interesting you brought this up, because we've had numerous conversations about this. People will say, well, just because we're a signatory on an international treaty, which this is, does not mean that, as you said, this has got to be passed, accepted by Congress, two-thirds, in order to be full-blown. However, you can correct me if I'm wrong, by being a signatory onto a treaty, international in scope, does that not mean we must act in compliance with that treaty, even though the Congress did not approve the signing on of that treaty? They didn't ratify the treaty. Don't we have to act as if we are? In other words, it kind of defaults to you're a part of this setting. Is that true, or is that not true?
Okay, if we're speaking to the letter of the law, which does not exist anymore in this country, the letter of the law is what the whim of the administration is on any given morning. But with regard to what you're saying here, if you're a signatory to a treaty, yes, you have a contractual obligation. I mean, these things have caused wars. I mean, these interlinked treaties caused World War I, World War II, big contributing factors. So the short answer to your question is yes. But the fact is that Obama has a pretext now, a legal pretext, to seize guns. He's saying right now, I'm invoking Executive Order 13603. We've got food riots. We've got civilian unrest. We've got all these other problems, and we've got to establish control. And 13603 will go into effect. People really need – I'll just say this. You want a crash course on 13603? Go to my website and put in the search engine. Don't go to Google. Okay, go to my website in the search engine and put in Executive Order 13603, and you'll read about civilian conscription, which is slave labor. You'll read about control of all food and water, control of all transportation, all manufacturing, all business, all commerce, all everything, and they can come take the food out of your home. And that's all covered under 13603 and more. Yep. And I probably have written through the years, I've referenced this horrible executive order probably 20 times. I've written, I think, 5 or 6 articles on this from different angles, depending on the particular part that I focus on. So people really need to familiarize themselves with this. When Jade Helm, if it goes live, 13603 will be the overlay. It won't be Jade Helm operating in a vacuum. It'll be the NDAA. There's your extractions. It's 13603, complete control of the economy, complete control of people, complete control of transportation and movement of bodies. These things are all going to come in together. And one person said to me recently, well, Dave, how do you know that? And then I counter by saying this. If they weren't planning to do these things, why would they waste the time and effort of codifying them? Precisely. It doesn't make any sense that you'd go to this trouble to have this elaborate executive order and this congressional act that really ticked the country off called the NDAA. Why would you do these things if you weren't planning to use them?
Precisely.
And they're all martial law type of legislations. There's no question about that.
You're exactly right, Dave. And I just want to say this because a lot of people will say, "No, wait a minute." If you go to Snopes, for example, Snopes.com, and folks, please familiarize yourself with Snopes as to who they are, where they get their money from, who they're associated with, where they get their information from, their bias leanings. But having said that, 13603, that executive order. It covers national defense resources preparedness. They will tell you, as in fact other even conservative websites will say, wait a minute, no need to get all upset over that because this is merely an extension of Executive Order 12.919, which okay, so everyone just take a deep breath. Well, wait a second, and the difference is, according to Stokes and other websites, is 12.919 is the same thing as 13.603, but it actually the only change is that it goes from the oversight. The FEMA oversight to DHS, because there was no DHS in '94 when 12.919 went into effect. So, but does that make it any less cutting or anything? No, incisive. No, of course not. It still exists, and it not only does it exist, it's been refined to include the current power structure, the current cabinet structure in our government. So it's still disturbing at its core. So you're precisely
Doug, I'd
correct.
say it this way: if I mean something, pretty much mean something, I'll say it once. If I really mean it and really want to emphasize it, I'll say it twice. Well, they've said it twice.
And many people are in the chat, in the interactive chat, and through email have talked about, the Boston after the bombings, how the whole city, really, the one area of the city was locked down, and the troops came in, and the troops were cheered on as they, went house to house pointing guns at the people, and the people were okay with it because they thought they were,
Yeah, how far down have we gone in the rabbit hole or into that programmed?
This talks about how susceptible we would be, or look at how, look at this as an example as to what would happen if there was a reason, given that the people believed, whether real or fabricated. And we see how easy it is for a society and a neighborhood and a community to go along with anything for the safety, safety, peace and safety line, even as the Bible says, as soon as they say peace and safety, watch, because sudden destruction comes.
You know what, Dave? I'm just going to, and I'm talking hypothetically here, and please understand, this is all hypothetical, but what frightens me the most is something that would happen to Barack Hussein Obama or Barry Soetoro. I don't want to see a hair on that man's head harmed. Let me tell you right now. But can you imagine the outrage, or what would happen?
Let me give you an analogy. When John Kennedy was desperately trying to get through civil rights legislation, which was the right thing to do at the time, America was very resistant and dragged its feet. After his death, Lyndon Johnson had a very easy time getting through Kennedy's ideas. Obama's martyrdom would lead to these things happening to us on steroids, and people would say, we got to do it because we feel so bad we lost our president.
Yeah, and yes, it would just be, it would be almost unimaginable, the blowback from something like that. So that's why I just, boy, the sooner the better, and the better off he is, and you ship him off to Hawaii or wherever, let him live his life out in relative obscurity, but don't let him be let him be a martyr, because man, that would just be it would just rip our country to shreds from the inside.
I totally agree with that too, and that's why when I get people that write me emails or website comments where they're threatening harm against this president, I delete them. I will be no party to these kind of actions. And really, it's not so much because I'm in love with Obama, but I don't advocate for violence. That goes against my Christian faith. But what I will advocate for is the fact that we do not need to have him be a martyr. You are so right on the money with this.
Yeah.
Let me go on to a few more things here on the 17 principles. The confiscation of property, homes, and businesses. And I wrote an article about this right before the end of the year. And what's happened here is, and I'm sure you're familiar with Dave Krieger, the guy that wrote Clouded Titles, who exposed the MERS theft in a very big way. And he gave seminars to district attorneys on how to protect the people's interests. And most of your district attorneys and city attorneys are sincere individuals who want to do the right thing for their citizens. And overwhelmingly, this is what Dave found. But what I wrote about before the end of the year was the fact that number 7 comes into effect, the confiscation of properties, homes, and businesses, where we thought the MERS theft of homes, which has now totaled an estimated 13 million. We are seeing this now come back. After really good progress being made, the judiciary at the appellate level, I think, has been bought off. And I don't have any proof of that. But what's interesting is the lower court decisions are very uniform. MERS, if you want to take someone's home, you have to prove that's the title of their home, and that person knew that was the title to their home, and they were making the payments to the appropriate mortgage company, and you have to go into a court of law and prove your case. Well, what's happened now with the appellate courts is they've stripped away all those victories, and now MERS thefts are on the rise again, because in these appellate courts, what they're saying is, number one, you don't have to produce a title to steal someone's home, and number two, you don't even have to go into court. And I think it's now, 11 or 13 states? You can do extrajudicial foreclosures is what they're called. And I wrote about that. If you go to the last week, on my website, pull up December and go to the last week, you'll find that article with the MERS theft. In fact, in my article today, the MERS theft is hypertext link, and I believe it takes you to that article, if I remember correctly.
Yep,
and so this is part and parcel to when you see martial law, you're seeing confiscation. Well, we're already seeing confiscation. Let me tell you about a lady that I used to work with before she retired. She had a mortgage with B of A, excuse me, and she wanted to refinance. And they told her, well, we can't approve you at the lower rate unless you stop paying your rate for 3 months, and we'll call you a property in distress, and then we'll let you refi for like 1.5 points less. And unfortunately, this lady is a brilliant lady, but she did a very stupid thing, and she went along with what they suggested. Well, on the third month, they got a foreclosure notice. And even though she had paperwork, and she was in her home for 22 years, so she had 8 years left in her mortgage, she lost her home after paying on it for 22 years.
All because right.
Yeah, and she went into court and she said, look, this is what B of A sent me. And they go, it doesn't matter. You didn't pay. Get out of your house.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. And folks, this perhaps, and Dave, thank you for bringing this up, because this is perhaps one of the most interesting articles, or one of the most informative articles. Well, all of your articles are informative, but this one here is particularly relevant. It's from 23 December of last year. The title is Merry Christmas, America. Appeals Court affirms MERS right to steal your home. A brilliant article. It's about MERS Corp Holdings Incorporated. It's well known for being an organized criminal enterprise, and you get into the depth of these clouded titles. And Dave Krieger is the author of Clouded Titles. So you're exactly right. And you know what? It's interesting because I've been researching this even more of late. Because I've been seeing some very, very peculiar things when it comes to mortgages and mortgage processing, and very troublesome. It's very people have to act very carefully when they do things. But how can people stay out of trouble?
Regulations are changing too, to where the banks have more leeway now to call in loans. And let me tell you what's very disturbing. I don't recall the exact period of time, but I believe it was close to 2 years, where the Federal Reserve was actually purchasing, or should I say printing money for, the purchase of $40 billion per month of mortgage-backed securities. And what that signaled to me is there's going to come a time in our future where they're going to come in, they're going to buy up every distressed property, and they're going to actually have the banks call in loans so they can go in and then purchase these prices at rock-bottom rates. Now, people are saying, why would you do that? They would do that for the same reason that back in April of 2013, Goldman Sachs purposely shorted gold and told their brokers to short gold to get the regular person out of gold so the elite could buy up gold at rock-bottom prices. After an economic collapse, people should ask themselves, what's going to hold value? What tangible assets are going to hold value? Well, real estate and their structures and gold. And this is precisely the move we're seeing taken on the part of the financial gurus in this country. They know what's coming, and they're preparing to weather the storm and come out the other side possessing all the goodies.
You're exactly right. And I was talking to my wife earlier today, and I'm not even sure how we got started on the conversation, but I said, and please listen to me, I said, if we had $100,000. I'd much rather have that $100,000 in either gold and silver or property rather than having it sit in the bank. And
yes.
You know, even when I say property, I'm talking about owned property, clear title and deed to the property, or gold and silver, as opposed to having it in the bank. And while we're on that, you covered this as well. And we should remind people about the fact that the G20 summit in Brisbane, Australia, last November, I think, created the rule that all deposits are merely unsecured loans to the bank.
Yes.
In other words, when you make so your savings account and your checking account are nothing more than unsecured loans to the bank. So if the bank goes belly up, you're going to lose whatever money you've got in there, basically, or at the whim. You're going to be at the whim of the bank, or they're going to take your money. I mean,
well, there was a news item that came out about 10 days ago. Actually caught the attention of my wife, and it was if you're taking $5,000 cash out of your bank for any reason, the bank is to contact the police. So by the time you get home, you got two cops sitting in your driveway. And this is where it gets serious now. Under the civilian asset forfeiture laws, they don't have to have a reason. They can just take your money.
Yeah. That just, I mean, folks, if you don't think that's real, look at the SARS reporting, the suspicious activity reports of your county. And there are places, you can just search on the internet, SARS reporting, and you'll pull up PDFs that shows the counties, your like, for example, whatever county you might live in, the banks that, how many suspicious activity reports, I think up through July of last year, it's valid or current. And you'll be amazed. And even if and I ran into this, even small amounts of money well under $5,000. If, for example, you were moving some money around, or in our case it was the death of a loved one, and this was outside of an escrow account for the estate, an executor fee and other things that we had to move, we just had to deposit and then pay some bills with. Well, the bank questioned that. And in fact, the bank manager had let it slip that this might have caught the attention of of a federal agency or two, even though we had done nothing wrong. Well, what does that mean? Well, it looks like you're attempting to structure. Okay. And that wasn't even, maybe it was just over $5,000, I think, total over the course of a week. So it doesn't even have to be a single transaction. It could be transactions spanning a short period of time. So, and that's pretty frightening to the average person, I think, or should be.
It is, and I wrote an article, and I may have to dust this off in the next couple of weeks because people need to get out of the banks for all intents and purposes. Now, I don't mean totally out of the bank, because you live in a society where you need to pay your bills. You need to stop all your automatic deposits. That's one thing. You need to have it come to you so you can control where you put that money. And you need to be more one bank account. And I've covered this extensively. I explained the SARS regulations, the structuring laws, and then the report requirements that each bank has. And I go through some scenarios. But the bottom line is this, is that people need to pay down their bills. And they need to use their bank accounts to do it. They can't control that. If you've got, let's say, a $6,000 balance left on your automobile, write a $6,000 check right out of your bank account. They can't stop it. They can hold it maybe for 10 days, but that's the extent of what they can do. And I tell people, don't use credit cards to pay for things anymore. I said, be smart and use cash, because you're wasting your money. Let's just do a simple math problem, okay? Now, I know I'm going to get criticized for not using compound interest, but I want to keep the math example simple, so bear with me. Let's say you have $10,000 in your bank account, and you're living at 5% inflation. Now, we all know that's a joke, and the government's lying through their teeth because they don't count gas or food, like we don't have to eat or drive to work when they figure inflation. But let's take the government's figure, 5%. Okay, in 10 years, okay, what's your money worth? It's worth $5,000. Why would you keep your money in a bank where it's a bottomless pit and that money just disappears. And where does inflation take it? And there's a lot more forces taking your money than just inflation. But let's just say, where does inflation take your money? Well, inflation is caused by what? The Federal Reserve printing money for that they don't have in terms of any backed securities for. And so who benefits from the Federal Reserve doing that? The cronies that the government gives sweetheart contract deals to, like the military-industrial complex and so forth. So what you're doing by leaving your money in the bank and playing this inflation game, you're funding the rise of corporatism at your expense. So why wouldn't people just take their darn money out of the bank, but don't do it in a way that's going to get the FBI or the IRS seizing your accounts. Don't go through that hassle. Just pay down your existing debts and don't do automatic deposit. And then you want to keep enough money in the bank so you can maintain regular business, and then take your money and do what the wealthy are doing. If you can go out and buy, let's say, a $30,000 distressed property right now in a HUD sale, that might not be a bad deal for you. And maybe you should buy a little gold and silver, maybe a gun to protect it, but buy some gold and silver, because I always say, when in Rome, do as the Romans do. And if the elite from the Federal Reserve and all the Goldman Sachs people think it's important to own real estate and to own gold because they know the crash is coming, maybe you should do the same thing, because maybe you'll come out the other side looking a little better.
Well, what you just said kind of piqued my interest a little bit, because I had a conversation. Many people know that we're working toward getting a new studio, expanding our studio. And I had a conversation with a mortgage broker. It was a hypothetical conversation. We got into some pretty intense discussion about the new mortgage rules. But you had mentioned, hey, go buy a $30,000 distressed property. And I assume you mean go out and buy it and pay for it and be done with it without having a mortgage. But
exactly.
Yes. Okay. When I was talking to a mortgage broker, we had a similar conversation, a hypothetical conversation, asking, well, I'll use your example. Well, let's say you're looking to buy a $30,000 distressed property, but you don't have $30,000. You might have $15,000 stuffed in your mattress. Then you want to mortgage the other $15,000. Right, wrong, or indifferent. That's what you want to do.
I wouldn't do that, and I'll tell you why. You'd be better off getting a relative or a close friend and putting together a limited partnership and doing that.
I agree.
At least coming out the other side, 50% of the loaf is better than no percent of the loaf.
I agree 100%. But here's what really blew my mind when I heard it, because I guess I'm from the old school. I just never heard this before. Keeping with your example now, and folks, think about this, and this is why I mentioned this earlier, a couple of weeks ago, I think it was now. If you were to take $15,000, let's say that's all the money you had in the world, you're 70 years old, and this is what you want to do. It doesn't matter. You take that $15,000 in cash out of your mattress, and you go to use that as a down payment, and you want to mortgage the rest. Do you know, Dave, that there's no mortgage company in America that will take that $15,000 cash as $15,000 cash as a deposit, down payment? There's no. You know why? Because they can't prove where you got it from. They automatically think that you got it from dealing in meth or money laundering or whatever. Did you know that?
Well, you can go through your bank and do it. They can't stop the purchase.
No,
you
they
just
can't
get a certified cashier's check or order the bank to pay, and they can't stop that. They legally cannot stop that transaction right now.
No, they can't stop the transaction, but they can deny the mortgage for the other $15,000. Is what I'm saying.
Well, yes, okay, I agree, and this is why you go get a limited partnership. In other words, you don't leave any money on the table, so to speak, for the bankers to come and get you. If you buy a $30,000 property right now and put down $15,000, there's a chance you're going to be holding the bag on the $15,000 because of what's coming with the economy.
Amen. Amen to that. I totally agree with that. But the way I looked at it was, everyone, the bankers and the government, they're looking at you as if you're a criminal.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, my goodness, my dad, if he was alive right now, would be just pulling what little hair he had out. Just thinking, This is just incredible what we're seeing here. 84,
light is dark, up is down. The criminals are calling the good guys criminals. In fact, I wrote a side piece article either yesterday or the day before where I said, who are the real conspiracy theorists? The conspiracy theorist is used to disparage, just like you should never listen to these views because they're from conspiracy theorists. Well, first of all, the word conspiracy theorist means that I'm questioning the statements of known liars. That's number one. And number two, the real conspiracy theorists are the people in the media that keep putting down our views despite overwhelming documentation. They're the ones who are involved in conspiracy theories, not us. We need to wrestle the narrative away from them and control the narrative and call it for what it is. You know, Jim Mars had a great line on my show one night when I had him on. Jim said that, the word conspiracy theorist makes me laugh because if you believe what the other side says, you have to be a coincidence theorist. And I think Jim was right on the money with that. And so it is up is down and white is black and night is day. And, truth, the telling of truth, as I said in 1984, is a revolutionary act. This is what we're getting right now. I mean, isn't it funny that the Washington Post and a Denver news station, I think it was Channel 7 up in Denver, on their website, they take my quote, which says, well, the Nazis went and got the Jews at 3 a.m. That's a true statement historically. And yet they put that out there like it was some wild conspiracy theorist idea because I was linking it in to Jade Helm planned drills at night. Well, Jade Helm is an extraction drill, and they're working at night. I think the parallels are right on the money. But no, I'm a conspiracy theorist.
Well,
I wish you would have mentioned me, though. I could have used the publicity. I would have liked the notoriety to be put down personally by the Washington Post. Instead, they just took my sentence. Well, but anyway, let's go to number 8, arrest without due process. I don't think that we need to even cover that. Arrest without due process. We don't need to go any farther than the NDAA. So we're there. And then you have massive papers, please, checkpoints with intrusive searches. And I probably should have put something in about the TSA, but my article was already up to 2,200 words. So I decided to just talk about the Real ID. And the Real ID will contain an unbelievable amount of personal information about you by the year 2016. In fact, here in Arizona, our legislature, in a moment of clarity, and we actually had a pretty good legislature about 4 years ago. Now we've got a bunch of punks and creeps and people that we need to get rid of. But 4 years ago, they actually passed legislation that says we will not participate in any of these mandatory Real IDs. So now in Arizona, what they're talking about doing to us by the end of the year is when you fly, your driver's license is no longer a valid form of identification. You must also have a passport now.
Yep. And this is, I know Pennsylvania was on one of the states that talked about not complying with this, and we went over this not too long ago on the show. And we were reading what the Real ID Act does, and it includes, just like the passport does, an RFID chip, as well as biometric identification information. And they're not going to let people fly without a government-valid identification. And if your state does not allow the Real ID Act to be implemented in their driver's license systems, then you will not have a government-valid ID. Therefore, you will need other forms.
Passport. If you have a passport, you can still fly. Hodges family has a passport because
domestically.
I promised my wife we're going to visit the homeland of her family, which is Norway. So, but you know what? The simple answer is this, and this is where I'm sorry, my fellow Americans, but this is where we're stupid. And I don't think Americans are stupid, but I think this is one instance where we are being stupid. If we would just sit down as a nation and say, we're not putting up with this crap. Your TSA policies, your security checks hasn't resulted in the prevention of one terrorist attack. Because if it had, they would be singing this all over the airwaves to make us further buy into it. And what we should be doing as a nation is just saying, I'm not flying. That's okay, we'll drive. We'll drive. Now, maybe in an extreme emergency like a death of a family member or something like that, maybe you make that exception. But overall, don't fly. Now, what would the airlines be doing if people said we're not flying? They'd be screaming at the administration to stop doing this. See, the power resides with us. We just can sit down and say we're not going to do it, and we're not going to fly, and we win. But we don't have people that think that far ahead in this instance, and I question the courage. I mean, people act like they're afraid to stand up to this government.
And that's the sad part. What we need to do is we need to stand up. And I've long said, Dave, that the TSA is perhaps the Achilles heel of the entire DHS power infrastructure, where if we stood up to the DHS en masse, we could win just on the numbers, and we could win on the economic effect it would have. If we said, no, you're not going to nuke us, you're not going to grope us, you're not going to grope my wife, you're not going to grope me, you're not going to nuke us, no, it ain't happening, then we could move a mountain, and I believe that to be true, because we saw that with when Alex Jones called for that boycott back a couple of years ago. It worked very well. And
Thanksgiving, you're exactly right. I remember that. Let me tell you what they would do, though. DHS would push back. I mean, they're not just going to take this resistance sitting down. So then they would move into the malls, they'd move in to the bus terminals and so forth, and they'd bring their TSA with them to do all the crap that they're doing. And you know what? They don't want to do that, and I'll tell you why they don't. They'll threaten to do it, and they may do it, isolated instances. But you want to wake a country up, okay? Start feeling up someone's wife as she's going into the shopping mall. Okay, that'll wake up the average person, and that's not what they want. They want people to remain fat, dumb, and happy. So they want people to remain ignorant. I don't believe that they would take this to any strong. So I agree with you. The TSA is their Achilles heel, and Doug. I'm baffled. I haven't flown. Gosh, I can't remember the last time. Last time I flew is when my mother passed away, and it was 3 years ago. And before that, I probably hadn't flown for another 5 years. So I've flown once in 8 years because I won't play this game.
Well, we
flew
flown once. I'm sorry, Dave. We flew once.
When I flew, this is kind of funny. I thought I was going to get sent to jail for this comment. I go through now. I stripped down when I went through security. I had shorts on, and I put my wallet, my keys, everything into my computer bag. Nothing. I had nothing on me but a basketball T-shirt and a pair of gym trunks that I was wearing. Nothing should have set off that detector. And I went through, and he says, "We got to check you over here." I go, "Check me? Check me for what?" I said, "Do I have shrapnel in my body that I forgot about?" And he goes, "Don't be a smart, you know what." And then he wands me, and there's nothing there. And he says, "We're not done." And he put his hands on my chest. And I looked at him. I said, "Does that mean you're proposing marriage to me, sweetheart?" And I said, "Did you enjoy that?" I thought he was going to take me to jail. He goes, "We send punks and smart alecks like you to jail." I said, "Go for it." And he goes, "You better get out of here while you can." That's the kind of crap that we're putting up with as we go through our airports. Only I can take it with me. He grabs my wife's breast, I would probably punch him out, and I would go to jail. And that's the attitude that we've got to take. We cannot take this tyranny anymore. We have to stand up to these punks, because TSA has not stopped one terrorist attack in this country.
Thank you.
We all know where the terrorists come from anyway. So I know we're coming up on the end of the hour break, and I don't want to jump into this right now, but I want to talk about forced conscription into labor camps as point number 11, and this is going to curl people's toes.
Yes. Well, thank you, because I was just about venturing into the mental picture of Dave Hodges in his Speedo.
No, it wasn't a Speedo. It was just gym trunks, okay?
Okay. Joe almost had to leave me in Montana, I think, with the TSA.
I had to tell him, look, if you get arrested here, I'm going home.
Yeah,
our flight was delayed a day already. I said, I'm leaving. If you want to get, because the TSA was giving him a hard time, and it was a stark contrast when we left here, because he was given a free pass. He didn't have to put anything through the security.
Oh, they let me walk right through.
But coming out, I mean, they had us all stripped down too, and take your belt off, take any, if you don't have a T-shirt on, you basically get down to where you're in a T-shirt, and put everything in your pockets in here, and empty your bags, your laptops, and he was just, I could see his blood pressure rising from this vein in his neck and his face color. And he started, uttering things under his breath, and I had to tell him, settle down.
Well, the TSA guy grabbed my medication from my pocket, and he said he had an X-ray, and I said, "No, you ain't doing that."
Yeah.
And anyway.
Yeah, let me propose something, and this is totally tongue-in-cheek, and we'll have the break to recover from this suggestion. But imagine if one day we have Fly Naked Day, and we go to the airport, and as we get up to the TSA checkpoints, we all put our clothes in our little gym bags and our suitcases we're carrying on, and we all walk naked.
Isn't there something
going to arrest everybody across the country? See, my mind can go like this. I can be as ridiculous as the TSA. The fact that I even have to suggest this talks about what a tyranny that we are under.
Yes,
it's absolutely ridiculous. This is being done to us. Yet you go to Europe, they don't do any of this stuff.
No.
My wife's cousin's family went to Europe last summer, and I asked her, how was TSA? And she goes, we barely encountered anything. They just x-rayed our bags and we walked on. I go, they didn't try to grope you or anything? You didn't see them pull people aside? They go, no, not at all. It was nothing like it is here. She said, we didn't encounter the Nazis until we got back.
That tells you just about everything you need to know right there. Mr. Dave Hodges, extraordinarily great writer, researcher, talk show host, The Common Sense Show. Friend.
Ladies and gentlemen, to this Monday, April 6, 2015 edition of the Hagmann Hagmann Report. Our guest tonight, if you're joining us late, is Dave Hodges. Go to his website, thecommonsenseshow.com. Bookmark that site, not only to read all of his great articles, rich in content, backed up by facts, but you can also listen to Dave's radio show live every Sunday night or download his podcast via iTunes. And Dave, where else is your podcast available on? It's on your website.
We put them right on the website under Radio Archives, and they stay up on the front page for a while. I also share them with Before It's News. And so they get pretty widely distributed. Our audience on the archives is far bigger than our live listening audience.
Oh, yeah.
Half the country's in bed by the time we go off the air. We go off the air at 1 a.m. Eastern.
I know. You keep me up on Sunday nights. It's rough sometimes. But, Dave, before I continue, got an email here through our Contact Us page at HagmannHagmann.com from Angeline asking why prepare. And she writes, I don't want to seem argumentative. And certainly this is not argumentative. But can you and Dave say, why bother preparing when we're all going to be eliminated? And after hearing Nathan Leal on our show Friday and you tonight, she writes, I've got to wonder. Well, if I can just address this, and I'm going to toss it back to you. But number one, Jesus instructed all Christians to occupy until he returns. And by occupying, that doesn't mean just to occupy space. It means to be proactive, not have a fatalistic outlook, and understand that God will move in ways to save his remnant. Look at what happened in the '67 war. The miracles two miracles that I can think of right off the top of my head that saved Israel. One was the inexplicable lining up of all the Egypt's air force, and Israel was able to take them out in one mission. And the second thing is a dust storm that caused the tanks, Egypt's tanks, to fire upon one another in confusion. So, things do happen that create chaos by the enemy. So it doesn't mean we're all going to be eliminated. There's going to be a remnant. So it would be, Angela, it would be fatalistic to say, well, why bother? Because it's like, well, why bother? Why bother staying fit? Because we're all going to die anyway. We can't have that fatalistic attitude. We have to afford to be viable and believe that we're going to be viable, so we can do God's will. Dave, what do you say about that question before we move on?
I think you answered that very well, but I understand her feeling. A lot of people make the mistake of thinking if we can just solve the immigration problem, or if we can just solve this problem or that problem, everything will be better. What we're fighting against is a philosophical view of life. It's satanically inspired, and it seeks to permeate everything that's good and just that most of us live by. Most of us live by a code. We're not perfect, but we try to live by a code. And that's under attack at every single level of our being. And also they're attacking us where we're vulnerable with regard to basic resources, shelter, food, so forth. So I understand the desperation people can feel because everywhere you turn, there's the enemy. But if you would just substitute the word enemy and phrase it as Satan, then you need to know where you got to go to draw power from. I could not do what I'm doing if I didn't feel it was divinely inspired. And I'm not saying I don't make mistakes in my journalism. I know I do. But I also feel that, when I sit down and I write something, it's something I say to myself is, thy will be done. please help me tell people what they need to know. What do you want them to know? And I ask that a lot more than I don't. So I understand her sense of hopelessness, but we have to remember who's the great inspirer, who provides humanity with hope. And if it wasn't for the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ, none of us would survive what's coming. A lot
Amen.
of us are going to survive what's coming. But more importantly, we will have the ultimate final victory whether we physically survive what's coming or not.
Amen. Thank you for what a very eloquently said. Thank you for that. All right, sir. Let's move on to Joe. I think you got it right there.
Yeah, number 11, forced conscription into various labor camps.
Yeah, let me go to 11, but I first wanted to update on something I brought up earlier. I went and checked out the website, America2050.org, during the break. It's still active, so people can go and look at that after the show. And, whoops, I just lost my screen here. I'm not sure I have a moment. Okay, it just came back. Okay, well, forced conscription, forced relocation, forced conscription, we see evidence of both in FM 3-39.40, the internment and resettlement operations, which came out from the Army in the form of a PDF. And I could have picked pages of documentation to make these points, but I'll just go to one right here. And this is a quote from this document. Detainees may also be segregated by ethnic and family groups and further segregated to protect the vulnerable individuals. Additionally, detainees may be categorized by behavior, cooperative, neutral, or combative. And then it goes on to say, and they can accurately resource guards and facilities to keep them under control. Juveniles within the IR, that's internment resettlement population, are typically segregated from the general population. And this is also a DOD regulation, 3115.09. So right there, that's forced relocation. They're telling you detainees, that's what they're referring to people they're taking to the FEMA camps. And then we go down, let me scroll down here, and it says a list of agencies connected with forced detention into these camps, and they list all the basic suspects, DHS, FEMA, embassy personnel, the DOD, U.S. Immigrations and Customs. So they have all the usual suspects in here. So this is a nationwide, fully encompassing program that involves the entire executive branch of the government. Now, this is where it gets scary. So I'm going to slow down for effect here. Section 502 of Executive Order 13602. Section 502, it says the following. Consultants, period. The head of each agency otherwise delegated functions under this order is delegated by the authority of the President under Section 710B, C, and Act 50 U.S.C., okay, and it says to C, employ persons of outstanding experience and ability without compensation, and to employ experts, consultants, or organizations. Excuse me, so I want to read C again under 502. To employ persons of outstanding experience and ability without compensation. Hello, this is slave labor. This is slave labor. There's no other way to justify this. Without compensation, without being paid, is slavery. So under Executive Order 13603, they can effectively come to your home. You are conscripted by the order of the President and the Secretary of Labor. They can send your wife off to one camp. They can send you off to another. And it says here in the FM 3-39.4 I alluded to earlier that they'll send the juveniles to a separate facility. That's why I included this in here. This is the splitting up of families, and this is the invoking of slave labor. Now, they have a military draft that goes with this, too, under the Selective Service, which we're all used to. But this is civilian, conscripted slave labor. Now, where else in history have we seen this? Gee, didn't the Jews work in the death camps, many of them, on the German war machine, where they were systematically starved to death over a period of time?
Yes, they did. Yes, they were made to do that.
So I just want to read this one more time, because no one believes me when I say this until I make them sit down and say, read this darn paragraph. Okay, Section 502, Okay, paragraph C, to employ persons of outstanding experience and ability without compensation. I don't know how much more clear it can be. And then you go back up to FM 3-39.4, and it talks about that people will typically be segregated, and then it goes on to say juveniles within the IR population are segregated from the general population. It's the last time you're going to see your family. That's what this is saying.
Yeah. Dave, I mean, you linked directly to the IR document dated February 2010. It's Department of the Army. I mean, it's all spelled out in this 326-page PDF. How can anyone deny it? I mean, it's right here.
Here's how they deny it, Doug.
Okay.
They say, well, they would never do that. I've shown people this. Oh, they would never do that.
Okay. Well,
that's their answer. Cognitive dissonance, drinking from the Kool-Aid, whatever you want to call it, but they would never do that. If they were going to do it, they would have already done it. Why aren't you in one of the camps? That's another one I hear too. Well, first of all, I won't go to the camp. I'll die at home.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, I'm not walking out and surrendering to anybody. They better get the jump on me, and they better chain every part of my body, because the first chance I get, I'm going to make them shoot me in the back.
Oh.
That's, they'll shoot me climbing over the barbed wire. I've determined that I will not die in captivity. No, I will not go along with this. And I go back to Alexander Solzhenitsyn, who was the victim of KGB roundups, where they took over a quarter of the city that he lived in. And he lamented that when he was in the gulags in Siberia, he said, we didn't love freedom enough. He said, if we would have grabbed a poker or a club or a stick or a brick or something, and these KGB agents wondered if they were going to go home that night, we might have slowed it down or stopped it. Americans, I don't advocate for violence, but I advocate for self-defense. And I'm telling you right now, I mean, I would much rather die a clean, clear death than I would to go through what people in concentration camps have gone through in the past history.
I totally agree with you.
Doug, if the other side knew that this resistance was coming, okay, it would give hesitation to showing up at your house. I'm not saying it would stop it, but I'm saying it would make them question it. And something else, too. You're an American soldier. At its heart, that young man or that young woman signed up to serve the country and protect and defend the Constitution. Their purpose when they started out was noble, and now they're being perverted. When they're doing extraction drills in Fort Lauderdale, that's a perverted purpose for the uniform. But at the heart of most of our soldiers is a true love of country. And their neighbors and their friends and their family are all going to be affected by this. The more barriers that we can put between the globalist plans to subjugate and exterminate a lot of us and to re-educate the rest of us they deem worthy of living, the more barriers we can put between us and them gives more time and more cause for the people carrying the guns to think twice about which side they want to support. And that's why I'm saying sit down and do airline strikes. Don't fly. Do as much as you can do to resist the globalists. Get as much money out of your bank and do it so you won't go to prison, and I'll promise I'll republish that article this week. We need to cause the globalists to have to slow down, because every moment we slow down, people participating in Jade Helm have to ask themselves, is this really what I signed up for?
That's I agree. I agree totally. And very well said too. And I would urge everyone as well. I read this when it came out in 1973, The Gulag Archipelago by Alexander Solzhenitsyn. It's not an easy read. You're not going to finish it in an afternoon. I can't remember how many pages. I mean, it's quite a thick book. But thank you for citing that, because it's an excellent eyewitness account of the Soviet forced labor camp system, and people don't think it can happen here. Well, we're already being programmed into loving our servitude, as predicted by people like Huxley and others. So you're exactly right, man.
Didn't Solzhenitsyn leave America because he didn't like the direction we were going?
Good question. I don't know. I don't recall. to be honest
I thought
with you.
he did, but it's something that's worth looking into. I remember that sticking in the back of my mind. Well, shall we go on to number 12?
Yeah, please, yeah, let's continue.
12 and 13 really go together, and I lump four of them together here in one. But outlawing of free speech and control of the media, we need to go no farther than the administrative fiat called net neutrality, which basically they can shut down Doug's show or Joe's show anytime they want. They can shut down Alex Jones, Steve Quayle, anybody. They can say, you're done. And they can hand off the Internet to Verizon, like what McCain tried to do back in 2008. It was Verizon and the old baby bells, Bell South and so forth, and they were going to charge differential rates so you could get access. So we could be relegated on the Internet to being at such a slow speed no one would ever listen or be able to read our stuff. So they have effectively eliminated free speech through these programs, and it's just a matter now of waiting for the implementation. So 12 and 13, the control of the media and the outlawing of free speech, it's poised to happen. And again, let's repeat what we said in the first hour. Prior to the extraction of dissidents, the real extraction, I really believe they're going to shut down the media so as not to call attention to what they're doing. I think that they'll shut down the alternative media, I should say.
Yeah. You got 6 corporations, and folks, you've heard this before, but you can check it out. 6 corporations running essentially the entirety of the corporate media, or the mainstream media, as they would call it. It's easy because instead of 6,000 choke points, you've got 6 choke points. With the alternative media, it's the Wild West out there. But let's bring it to the more recent FCC administration. What they did here recently, the FCC, they secretly drafted up this huge system of regulations, and they did this under the cover of darkness. They didn't release any information, and then bang, they released it. And is this the backbone, the architecture of the takeover of the Internet? Is this what you're referring to?
Yes.
All right.
I believe. Well, I don't believe it's going to be the only thing they do, but this is the sine qua non. Yes, this is where it's going to start. Okay.
All right. That's a fair answer, and I certainly understand that. Okay. If you want to move on, or
massive surveillance programs and snitch programs, and 15, the total control or elimination of religion. Start with 14. This is something that
oh boy. And I couldn't do this justice because of the space that I felt I had to limit the article to in terms of words. So people listening, please remember this name, Pastor Mansfield, Walter Mansfield. If, again, you go to the search engine at the Common Sense Show, don't use Google, go to the search engine at the Common Sense Show and put in Pastor Mansfield. I've referenced Pastor Mansfield significantly in 3 different articles since I interviewed him telephonically at the end of 2014. And he was part of the clergy response team. In fact, you played that wonderful piece from Paul Harvey that parallels what Pastor Mansfield told me. Where Paul Harvey says, well, if I was the devil, I would do this, that, and the other. And I was listening to these things, and I go, my gosh, this is a lot what Pastor Mansfield told me. He was part of the early clergy response team. He volunteered when he was asked out of a sense of duty and patriotism to his country. He believed that FEMA and DHS were simply trying to help as many Americans survive some natural disaster as possible. But he went on to be trained, and he was shocked at his training. And this gets into 15 as well, which is the total control or elimination of religion. They were taught that, first of all, they're going to have people that will not allow themselves to be relocated. So the pastors were trained, go to the homes of the people, speak to them, and this would be in lieu, of course, sending in the SWAT teams. And they were trying to convince them that, Romans 13, God commands you that you obey the government, and they want you to go to a relocation camp. It's for your own good, please go. And once they were in the relocation camp, this is where every Christian needs to get worried. And I want people to go and read the entire article because I couldn't do it justice in the small space here. But what Pastor Mansfield talked to me about, he said that what he was told in his training was that when you are in the internment camps you're going to encounter people who are separated from their families. So there we go back to FM 3-39.4 again, where that reference is made there. Pastor Mansfield received that same instruction. And by the way, this is ministering inside the FEMA camp, so much for FEMA camps don't exist. And Pastor Mansfield was told, as well as with the other pastors, that they could not read from the Bible. They could not quote Scripture. In fact, I've got the verbatim quotes in the article that Pastor Mansfield gave to me with the documents, and it said something to the effect that Christianity has been used to persecute and subjugate, and therefore we don't want to do anything to cause people to feel that way, so simply comfort them, but don't mention Jesus, don't mention the Bible. This is the elimination and control of religion. And this is what's waiting for people when they get to the FEMA camps, where I'm convinced that Jesus Christ will be outlawed in a FEMA camp, at least verbally and overtly. Certainly not in our hearts and our minds, but overtly. So this is very concerning to me. And again, Pastor Walter Mansfield, go to the search engine of the Common Sense Show, read the articles that I've written with regard to my interview with him. It is shocking. And by the way, the 28,000 pastors that we know are part of the clergy response team, they've all signed non-disclosure agreements. And it gets real nefarious for them, too. Pastor Mansfield's put his own life in jeopardy. Not that they're going to go assassinate him, but when trouble starts, unless he has a FEMA clergy response team badge, he will not be allowed into a safe area. And he said they were practicing under the auspices of having a biological or chemical attack. So they're basically telling the pastors, you know, if you want to live and survive and be in the safe areas, you got to do exactly what we tell you to do. So there was coercion for the pastors as well, too. And I asked Pastor Mansfield, I said, what Bible-believing and Bible-teaching Christian pastor would ever go along with something like this? And he said, greedy ones. He said they want to keep their 501(c)(3) tax exemption. And I've used that as a litmus test. Right now I'm involved with a home study group. I've walked away from my church because I don't believe a tax-exempt church can freely preach the word of Jesus Christ and the Lord. So I've walked away from that, and I've embraced, private study groups, and we are in search of a church home, but I won't go to any church home that has tax exemption as part of its business practices. And certainly if I suspect they're part of the clergy response team, as I did my previous church clergy, that's an immediate disqualification for me. And when Paul Harvey said in the clip that you played, that was such a great clip that you guys played at the top of the hour, and it said that first I'd start by undermining the churches. Folks, it's already happened. Ask yourself when your pastors talk to you about the fact that homosexuality is unnatural. And no, I don't call for job discrimination or chastising. Okay, I have my beliefs, my problems, my sins I have to answer for, but certainly it is an abomination in the eyes of God. What about abortion? When has your pastor gotten up there and criticized Obamacare on his position for abortion? If you're not hearing it, you're in the wrong church. You need to get the heck out of that church and go worship with other Bible-believing Christians who are not influenced by the federal government.
Amen. Wow. I could not have said that any better. And it's interesting, folks, by the way, Dave Hodges, a clergy response team insider, reveals the duties of a pastor inside of a FEMA camp. That was, you published that on December 10th, 2014. Just a pretty chilling article, and it does get into what Pastor Mansfield had stated to you. And I like it because you do close this off with that article off with the phrase from Solzhenitsyn, who said that we should have resisted the KGB at the front door. If the KGB thought that they might not go home that night, the Russian people might have had a different fate. And there it is. I mean, think about that. It's pretty. Well, that says it all. But 28,000 FEMA trained pastors is what you're saying. So 28. That to me is really mind-boggling as well. 28,000. Okay.
Yeah, that's 9 per county.
All right.
That's 9 per county, and it just shows you who's in control of this entire operation. So when we talk about Jade Helm, I'm sorry if I sound like a religious fanatic, and well, actually, I'm not sorry. But when we talk about Jade Helm, we're talking that this stuff is satanically inspired.
Exactly.
I mean, what government that cared about its people, that practiced the Christian principles that this nation was founded upon, what nation would practice on subjugating and exterminating its own citizens?
I totally agree. The other part of this, Dave, is saying that the pastors will be utilized as informants, which of course violates that ever so sacred privilege between a pastor or a priest and the member of the congregation. I mean, it's recognized by law, but we can no longer trust that sanctity anymore of personal confessions and revelations made to pastors, priests, or rabbis, and it's undermining every aspect of that relationship with the pastors and with the church.
I didn't close the loop on what you just said in that article, too, and I want to point out something obvious. If you're already incarcerated and you've lost your property, your freedom, access to your family and friends, you're totally isolated, and here's the one person that you think you might be able to have some faith in, and that's a man of God, because you're bonded, by the blood of Jesus Christ as a believer, and he is actually spying on you. And let's say that you say some things that might be dissident perceived, and he goes to tell on you. Isn't that pastor, in effect, almost committing murder, or he's an accomplice to murder, if this is where this is headed? This is how serious this is.
Yeah, I would say. And this is sad. And what more can you say on this except that we have to be ever so careful? And I would recommend asking your pastor, to those listening, if you have a church that you go to, if they are if their participants are they FEMA trained? Ask your pastor that to find out.
I did. I sent him an email.
And
I asked him. I said, "Can we meet? I'd like to discuss with you what's the problem behind tax-exempt status of our church, and I'd also like to discuss the clergy response team and what actions you're taking to steer clear of that." And he didn't respond to my email, so I resent it twice. I never got a response. That's when I made the decision to leave that church.
Well, yeah, and I think you probably did get a response. The silence was your response.
Exactly. And, we've asked Pastor Paul Begley, one of the first guests we've had on the show, been a friend of the show since we started. He told us about a packet he received from Department of Homeland Security, and they had a list of different questions they wanted answers to. How many were in the congregation? Messages he preached about, what it was about his congregation, who believed certain things, and it was broken down, and he was asked to fill out these forms. And then, like you said, Dave, you have pastors that won't say anything on it, and they're afraid to. And as just like you said, we have the church, just like we see how there is the division of any aspect of our society. We have this division in the church. We have the true church, and we have an apostate church that is conforming to the world. And these are the churches that have been conforming to the world, are the same churches that have the pastors who are part of this. And, it
as a church,
spreads across denominations.
Yeah, we as a church with the same pastor when he was much younger used to go to abortion clinics, Planned Parenthood, and we'd pass out flyers to young girls going in saying you do have a choice. And we gave them options for contact and no pressure, no nothing. Just here's another way, and here's a way that we wish you'd look at. And this was sponsored by our church. We know the church no longer does that kind of thing. You don't hear the fire and brimstone or even the biblical condemnation of what we know to be wrong, the taking of an innocent life through abortion. And yes, there's times maybe you have to make a choice with mother's life and so forth. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about using abortion as birth control, which is one of the purposes of Obamacare. And how each church pastor is not speaking out against this across the country is just mind-boggling to me. You know, when you have a tax-exempt status, you probably save about a third of the money that you'd have to pay in taxes, about a third of your revenue. So let's say a church maybe takes in $100,000 a month. That costs you about $30,000. Isn't that interesting? $30,000, 30 pieces of silver. This is what our churches have done to the followers.
Isn't that interesting? Coincidental?
I don't know if it's coincidental, but it's so depressing because the church should be our foundation of resistance against this tyranny that we're going through. Instead, all too often, the church is a complicit participant in what's coming.
I totally agree. All right.
You know what would change this? It's the same strategy as not flying. If everyone did what I did, where we meet with 6 or 7 families, on a Wednesday night, and we go through and we read from the Bible, and we fellowship, and we have our dinners together, I think we gain much more from that anyway, too, rather than being in a big church. But that aside, if people stopped going to the churches and stopped contributing their money, then the pastors would have a choice: tax-exempt status or preach the real word of God and get my flock back.
There you go.
It's the same thing as saying not flying. See, we ultimately have the power. All we have to do is withdraw our participation.
That's exactly. Very well said. Well, I can't believe how every time you come on the show, the show just flies by. I mean, and folks, please share this broadcast with others, and make sure you also tell your friends and family about Dave's Common Sense Show every Sunday night, and thecommonsenseshow.com. Make sure you share the link with your fellow family members and friends. But here we've got about 20 minutes of the show left. Let's not waste.
We got 2 items to cover.
Go ahead.
Yeah, executions without due process of the law and total suspension of the Constitution.
All right.
16, executions. Most Americans don't realize that executions without due process of law have already been carried out against American citizens. Anwar al-Awlaki, and I don't care if he was a supposed Muslim radical cleric who the official said was involved in planning al-Qaeda operations. The man was an American citizen. His 16-year-old son from Denver was a kid, and we murdered him with a drone.
Right.
And then you get into Jude Keenan Mohammed, you get into Abdul Amin Anwar al-Awlaki. These 3 men were executed by this administration without the due process of law, and they were American citizens. So those people who say the NDAA isn't meant for us as American citizens, I would submit here are 3 people, and I don't care if their names are of Muslim or Middle Eastern extraction. That's irrelevant. They were American citizens. And American citizens not defined by ethnicity or religion. They were entitled to their day in court. What does it matter? If they're guilty of something, put your case on. Let them have a lawyer. Do it out in public. Show that our system works. Obey the Constitution. No, instead, we issue some kind of order out of the White House. Yeah, we're going to murder these 3 Americans without due process of law. And see, I submit if the rules don't apply to everyone, they apply to nobody. And if we can murder 3 Americans this way, they can murder 30 million Americans this way.
And people need to understand that. Maybe people would feel differently if it was an Anglo-Saxon surname or a white-bread name. I'm not talking about race. I'm talking about as opposed to Middle Eastern name. Okay, so they're American citizens. Sorry, but American citizens have rights bestowed upon them by the Constitution. And if they can do it to Anwar al-Awlaki, as despicable of a man that he might be, they can do it to you and I, and will do it to you and I.
Well, his 16-year-old kid,
yes,
is also a whole different matter. See, now the administration shows they're willing to murder innocents.
Well, we've done that for.
Yeah, it's unacceptable. We deserve the government.
Damage.
Yeah, I don't buy that, though.
Right.
I don't buy the collateral damage argument. then if you need to arrest the guy, arrest the guy. If he resists with lethal force, then you have the right to kill him. But you didn't have the right to assassinate him in a unilateral decision and violate his constitutional rights. See, this should be an affront to every single American. Because, see, the NDAA doesn't say it's only going to apply to people who have a Muslim background. Right. It says that we can declare someone to be an enemy combatant and take him off the street for an indefinite period of time. And we can see here the NDAA has been used to murder people.
It's amazing, the conservatives cheering on the fact that all of America has been declared a battlefield. You know, none of this is right. I mean, it just smacks of this mental programming, this mind control stuff that we're the dumbing down of America, of Americans, and all of the West, but the mind control aspect of things, that this is okay to do. It's not okay. I'm sorry.
This is where we need to be speaking out. Every life has value, and when the Founding Fathers set up our system of jurisprudence, they protected everybody. They protected the minority, the person of one, the group of one, with the civil liberties of the first 10 amendments. And very wisely, states like Rhode Island would not have approved the Constitution without the protection of individual liberties. And yet here today in America, where's the outcry?
Well,
the Founding Fathers would never have accepted this for 2 seconds.
No, I totally agree with you on that. And there is no outcry. The lack of outcry speaks volumes as to what of a nation of a populace that has again been dumbed down or has been reprogrammed to believe that this is okay. And you know, we're losing this. We're losing our country by each generation is every successive generation, it seems, David, it's getting worse and worse and worse. And you know, we're going to die off. Our age group is going to die off. How much worse is it going to be 2 and 3 generations later if we last that long?
I don't think we're going to last that long. I think there's an immediacy that they feel because we've had an effect. Shows like yours, you know, the Hagmann Hagmann Report, and so many other people like Alex Jones, they're wakening up millions, and they need to move quick.
And your show, I mean, between your writing and your show, and all of us collectively, and I think we're putting, I think we're breaking through, and I think there will be a remnant, of course, that will be created by this, and that remnant, of course, is going to be, perhaps it may cause a mass awakening of sorts. Excuse me. But go ahead and move on. I didn't mean to dominate here. Go ahead and move on, sir.
Well, I think you're right, but the awakening, we can't, maybe I'm wrong, but I think the only way that we can defeat the other side with a show of physical force is if our military collectively jump ship. And even then, Obama has the majority of our combat troops out of the country by design. That's why we're still in Afghanistan, although it serves no legitimate purpose. But even if you had the veterans and the domestic station military jump ship, then we have the Russians and the Chinese to contend with. This would not be an easy fight. I wrote an article not too long ago saying even if the military joins us, I think we'd be relegated into guerrilla warfare similar to General Giap and the Vietnamese, or the Viet Cong, I should say, because we would be outmatched. So if we're outmatched physically, then we have to look for another venue to express our resistance. And I think the resistance needs to come through the power of Jesus Christ. Now, I know a lot of people believe we're in absolutely the end days, and they might very well be right. And I haven't discounted that myself. But we don't know the hour or the day. And I think that God commands us to fight the good fight. And I think if we were true to His word collectively and unilaterally as a people, then we might be able to push back the final days to another generation, which I would prefer, because I would like it if my 14-year-old son got to live out the same kind of life I've been blessed to live. But the way things are going, he doesn't have a future.
No, and that's what this is all about. You know, too many people are thinking, not thinking about our progeny, or our children and our grandchildren, what kind of lives they're going to have, and we have to think that way. We have to look out for them, because I do contend that one of two things is going to happen. They're going to look upon us, our graves, with contempt, or with a certain amount of respect and thankfulness. And I don't think it's going to be the latter. I think it's going to be the former, because the majority of us did not stand in the gap. We didn't play our position, or at least we didn't make the effort to do so. But we have to, because we can fight City Hall. That mantra that we can't fight City Hall, to me, is a fatalistic mantra. It's programmed into our heads. And,
well, the ones that came up with it is City Hall.
Exactly.
That's who came up with it. Globalism will win. Well, who's saying that? Well, the globalists. I'm not saying that. I'm not giving up. Now, listen, I know things are bleak, and the odds on paper are that we're going to lose, and that people like you and I are going to get buried in those FEMA coffins. But that doesn't mean I'm going to give up.
Amen.
This is why, in some ways, and I don't obsess with it anymore, but I got a background in sports, both as a player and a coach, and the lessons that one can learn from sports, the biggest lesson I learned was a sense of resilience. In the darkest of dark days, nothing is as bad as it ever looks. And even in the best of best days, you're never as good as you hope to be. The thing that you need to do to be successful and persevere against most opponents is to put one foot in front of the other and play the game the way it's meant to be played. And for Christians, that means being true to our faith and bonding together and refusing to submit to tyranny, even if it costs us our life.
Amen, brother. You said it well. My man, we only I can talk. We only have about 10 minutes left of the show. Any, as you kick back and just kind of contemplate the last couple of hours you spent with us, any closing thoughts, anything you want to end with, anything you want to bring up that you haven't, it's yours. I mean, whatever you'd like to.
I think it's important. Well, first of all, I want to mention this, too. If you or Joe could send me the link to this show as soon as it's available, I'd sure appreciate it.
Sure.
Because I want to get this out far and wide, and I have put out your shows in the past, but your website design has me confused, so I'm admitting my technical inferiority and stupidity here. So if you could help me with that, I'd appreciate it. But as far as what I'd like to close on is that it's easy to get so mired in the negativity that depression becomes, like a melancholy that sets over everybody. And what we sometimes forget when we're in the midst of this fight is we live on a planet that was made by the Creator for our growth, our fulfillment, and our enjoyment. And I think we lose the third part of that in people in this movement. We forget to enjoy life. And we still have people around us that may not fully understand the battle that they're involved in, and that's okay, because we can enjoy our families and our friends without delving into these things. We need to learn to live in the moment and appreciate what we have. And a lot of times after I write an article, I'm not kidding, I metaphorically and symbolically and realistically, I'll go take a shower, because I want to wash the human crap off of me that I feel compelled to write about, so I can go live my life and relate to people on a human level and enjoy the time I have left on this planet. And I would encourage everyone to know when to walk away and say, enough for today. Let's have fun today. Let's not get mired in the problems, because the problems are still going to be there tomorrow. So when you go with your son or daughter to a movie, or you're going out to eat with the family, be emotionally present with the family without worrying about any of this stuff. Deal with your family's issues, your problems, your kids' homework. And I think that if we don't, we really ignore a lot of the gifts that God makes available to us from which we enjoy this life. And there are things that really promote our personal and spiritual growth as well, too. So I would say don't be so obsessed with this, because when I'm away from this work, I mean, people see one side of me, Doug, when I write and when I come on shows like yours, but there's another side to my personality that, unless someone knows me really well, like my news director, Annie DeRiso, there's another side to me. I used to work in a comedy club right out of college. I did that for 9 months as an MC. There's another side to my personality, and I love life, and I enjoy all the gifts that God has bestowed upon us, and I try to take advantage of every one because we don't get this time back again. And so that would be my strongest, overwhelming message I would like to leave to people. And then the next morning when you wake up, put on your armor and kick the crap out of these Satanists who are trying to wreck our lives.
Amen, brother. I couldn't have said that any better. What a wonderful closing sentiment.
Great inspirational ending there.
All right.
And definitely, Dave, I couldn't agree with you more that we have to learn how to, as one of the pastors said on a YouTube compilation, the joy is too often derived from, worldly entertainment sources, and we can't have that being the source of our joy, nor can we let the powers that be of this world take our joy away.
Amen. Well, Mr. Hodges.
So well said, Joe. Thank you.
I just want to say thank you so much for standing in the gap, being a watchman on the wall, for helping to get the word out, and for being on the cutting edge of the tip of the spear with respect to your wonderful research and information. And next time, maybe the Washington Post will cite you by name instead of cowardly.
I was laughing so hard when I saw this. If people don't think there's a conspiracy in Jade Helm, and we've gone through the 17 things, because the 17th thing was the evisceration of the Constitution, and that's done because of the other 16 things. But here's what's interesting. From Thursday, and I wrote an article on this, from Thursday until Sunday, if you put in the search term into Google, Jade Helm 15, it didn't matter how you couched it. Jade Helm extractions, Jade Helm martial law. It didn't matter what descriptive terms you put in. There was the same article by the Washington Post pinned at the top. So no matter who was up second or third or fourth or fifth, there would always be that Washington Post debunking the conspiracy theorists who are worried about Jade Helm. So if you don't think there's a conspiracy to cover this up, folks, and their true intent, go back and read my article. They had that up there for 3.5 days, and I've asked people this who know websites much better than I. Have you ever seen an article pinned by Google at the top for 3.5 days? Never. You wouldn't see it for 3 hours. Sometimes it's not there longer than 3 minutes. And yet they did that for 3.5 days. And then they replaced it with the Denver news station article from Channel 7 where they took my Hitler quote of 3 a.m. extractions, and they left that up there as number one for about 3 hours. So if people say, there's not a conspiracy to cover this up, I'd say, au contraire, mon frère. Just like the drills in 7 states, and we already know for sure that's going on in at least 10. And it's already started. Yep. It's already started more than 3 months ahead of schedule.
And it's going to be and we reported on this early on, all 48 states here, at least in the contiguous, the lower 48, at least subsets of Jade Helm, perhaps not under the same name, but having a relationship with Jade Helm. So we're going to be seeing.
There's one more marker, Doug, that I could throw out here before we close. People always want to know when, and I will tell you this. My insider military sources that have connections into the Joint Special Operations Forces have talked to some of these guys. And I think this is an important point to make. They don't know the extent of this drill. They're not given rationale, firm guidelines. It's a fluid operation, and they're nervous as heck about it. And I'm talking the leadership inside Jade Helm. They're nervous. This is what's being reported to me. But people say, well, how do we know when it's about to happen? Well, it's not going to be like any kind of magical rapture. I know for a fact, we may not have this for the extractions of the dissidents. Before martial law is declared, look and see if your pastors have disappeared for any period of time. Any last-minute conferencing with DHS. I believe that the pastors coalescing together, perhaps disappearing for periods of time together, is a marker that martial law is imminent because of the clergy response team function.
Very much like the wartime scenarios, pizzas at the Pentagon. Interesting concept. All right, my brother. Hey, we're up against the close of the program. I just want to say thank you again so much for your time tonight, your gift of time. It's very much appreciated, and many, many people, what a positive response, thanking you all the way from South America to Europe to all throughout the United States, getting emails saying great show, great information, and thank you.
And we'll get you a link to the show in about a half hour or so, half hour to an hour.
That'd be great. I would just say to those people, thank you for those comments. Remember who the Lord is, and that's where we need to put our efforts.
All right, brother. Well, thank you so much for your time. God bless you. You stay safe and keep on keeping on, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, guys. Always a pleasure.
Right. God bless you. Have a good night.
Right.
That was Dave Hodges from thecommonsenseshow.com.
Just got an email from AmericanSurvivalWholesale.com, folks. Discount code Dave Hodges. So moved. They're so moved tonight from what they heard. Folks, listen to this. Free shipping on everything. That's right. Free shipping on everything. So if you're going to order from American Survival Wholesale, do it now. Free shipping on everything. You have to enter the code Dave Hodges. Okay. Upon checkout, enter the code Dave Hodges in the memo section or in the coupon code section, Dave Hodges, and you get free shipping. That's from AmericanSurvivalWholesale.com.
Tomorrow, Stan Deo will be on with us. Wednesday, author of the Shinar Directive, Dr. Michael Lake, will be our guest. Not going to want to miss that show. He also authored a chapter of Tom Horn's Blood on the Altar.
Yep.
And his latest book, The Shinar Directive, is fantastic. Once again, also, Paul McGuire's new book, Mass Awakening, is available.
Oh, man. Folks, what a tremendous book. Mass Awakening, Paul McGuire. Couldn't say anything before, but, aside from, or about the contents, but you're going to want to add this to your library. This is, I believe, his seminal work. And I love A Prophecy of the Future of America, but this is, I believe, his seminal work. That's Mass Awakening, Paul McGuire.
Until tomorrow, stay safe, God bless, and have a great night, everyone.